The auction block wasn't meant for people, but that morning it held 7 souls. Mara Whitlock stood frozen as her father-in-law shoved her youngest daughter forward, the child's bare feet slipping on ice-crusted wood. Around them, the crowd stood silent, breath clouding in the bitter air, eyes averted as if shame could be hidden by looking away. "Take 'em all or leave 'em," the old man snarled, his voice cutting through the cold like a blade. "I'm done feeding dead weight." Then, from the back of the square, a tall figure pushed through the frozen onlookers. Ethan Calder hadn't spoken to another soul in months, but today he would shatter his silence and change 7 lives forever. Before we begin this journey across the hard winter of 1875, I want to ask you something. Drop a comment below telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel, and if this tale moves you, hit that like button. Now, let's step back to that bitter morning when everything changed. The town of Coldwater, Montana Territory woke that February morning to a sky the color of old bruises. Snow had fallen through the night, covering the rutted main street in a blanket of white that would soon be trampled brown by wagon wheels and boot heels. But for now, in the hour just past dawn, the world lay quiet and cold. Ethan Calder stood at the window of the general store, a sack of cornmeal under one arm, watching the townspeople gather in the square. He'd come in early, before the crowd, preferring the silence of empty streets to the chatter of neighbors who asked too many questions. For 8 months now, he'd kept to himself on his ranch 5 miles north of town, speaking only when commerce demanded it. "Trouble brewing," said Mr. Brennan from behind the counter, following Ethan's gaze. "Vernon Whitlock's called some kind of gathering. Sent his boy around yesterday evening, knocking on doors." Ethan said nothing. Vernon Whitlock's name carried weight in Coldwater. Not the good kind, but the heavy kind that pressed down on folks until they bent. The old man owned the sawmill and held mortgages on half the homesteads in the valley. When Vernon spoke, people listened, even when they didn't want to. "You planning to stay and watch?" Brennan asked. "No," but Ethan didn't move. Something in the way the crowd was forming, tight and uncomfortable, like witnesses to an accident, held him there. Men stamped their feet against the cold, hands shoved deep in coat pockets. Women clustered together, whispering behind gloved hands. Children had been left at home. Then Vernon Whitlock appeared, driving a flat wagon pulled by 2 massive plow horses. The wagon bed had been swept clean of snow, and on it stood a woman and 6 children. Ethan's hand tightened on the sack of cornmeal. The woman was perhaps 30, though hardship had carved lines around her eyes that made her seem older. She wore a threadbare coat over a faded dress, and her dark hair had been pulled back in a simple braid. She stood very still, one arm around a girl of maybe 4, the other hand resting on the shoulder of a boy who couldn't have been more than 6. Behind her, 4 more children huddled together, 3 boys and another girl, ranging from perhaps 8 to 14. None of them wore adequate clothing for the cold. The smallest girl had no shoes. Vernon climbed onto the wagon bed with the aid of a cane, though everyone knew the cane was more for show than necessity. At 65, he was still broad-shouldered and strong, with a face like weathered granite and eyes that had never learned kindness. "Good people of Coldwater," Vernon began, his voice carrying across the square with practiced authority. "I've called you here this morning as witnesses to a family matter that requires public resolution." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. "This here is Mara Whitlock, widow of my son Thomas, who died of fever this past autumn. These are his children, my grandchildren, in the eyes of God and law." Vernon's cane thumped against the wagon bed. "For 4 months I have sheltered them, fed them, clothed them. I have honored my son's memory by providing for what he left behind. But my generosity has limits." Mara's face remained impassive, but Ethan saw her arm tighten around the small girl. "Thomas left debts," Vernon continued, "more debts than I knew about while he lived. The foolish boy borrowed against his wages, borrowed against future timber yields, borrowed from men in places as far as Helena. And when he died, those debts became mine to settle." "That's not how debt works," someone called from the crowd. A younger voice quickly shushed. Vernon's eyes narrowed. "That's exactly how it works when your name is on the sawmill that employed him. When your name is on every deed and contract in this valley. His debts came home to me and I paid them, every last dollar." He turned to face Mara fully now, though his words were still for the crowd. I calculate the cost of settling Thomas's obligations, plus the cost of housing and feeding 7 extra mouths these past months, at approximately $800. A murmur rippled through the gathering. $800 that I will never recover, Vernon said, unless recovery is made in kind. Ethan felt something cold settle in his chest that had nothing to do with the weather. I am a fair man, Vernon declared. I will not turn family out into the winter with nothing. Instead, I offer this. Any man willing to take on this burden may have them. All of them, or none. I'll not see the family divided. Take them into your household, put them to work, and the debt is settled. I'll draw up papers making it legal and proper. The crowd's murmur turned to shocked silence. Mara finally moved, stepping forward. Mr. Whitlock, please. You'll speak when I permit it, Vernon snapped. You brought this on yourself, girl. If you'd been a proper wife, maybe Thomas wouldn't have drunk himself into debt trying to forget what waited for him at home. The words hit like a slap. Mara's face went white, but she didn't lower her eyes. The oldest boy, the 14-year-old, lunged forward, but Mara caught his arm, holding him back with surprising strength. So, Vernon said, turning back to the crowd, who among Coldwater's good citizens will step forward? Take this woman and her children, put them to honest work, and we'll call all debts settled. No one moved. The seconds stretched out, marked only by the distant caw of a crow and the shuffling of cold feet in snow. Come now, Vernon said, and there was something ugly creeping into his voice. 6 children old enough to work. The woman strong enough, even if she is a poor cook. Someone here could use the extra hands. Still, silence. Ethan watched the woman, Mara. She stood straight-backed on that wagon, her children pressed close, and in her eyes was something he recognized. Not fear, though that was there too. Not shame, though Vernon had certainly tried to plant it. No, what Ethan saw was the same thing he'd seen in his own mirror every morning for 8 months. The look of someone who'd already lost everything and was now just waiting to see what got taken next. Mr. Peterson, Vernon called out, gesturing to a farmer near the front. You've been complaining about losing your hired man to the silver strike. Here's 3 boys could take his place. Peterson looked at his boots. Can't afford to feed 3 more mouths, Vernon, barely making it as is. They'll earn their keep, that's the point. I said no. Vernon's jaw tightened. He turned to a woman in a fine wool coat. Mrs. Henshaw, you're always saying you need help with your boarding house. This woman could work, and the girls could clean rooms. Mrs. Henshaw's face flushed. I run a respectable establishment, Vernon. I'll not have my reputation questioned by this arrangement. There's nothing improper about Christian charity. Don't dress this up as charity, interrupted a man Ethan didn't recognize. You're trying to sell people like cattle. It's shameful. Shameful is leaving family to starve, Vernon roared. Shameful is turning your back when someone asks for help. I'm offering these people a roof and purpose, and all I ask is that someone else take up the burden. You're asking someone to take on $800 of your debt, the man shot back. That's what you're asking. The argument spread through the crowd like fire through dry grass. Voices rose, some defending Vernon's right to recover his losses, others condemning the very notion of the gathering. Through it all, Mara and her children stood silent on the wagon bed, specimens on display while their fate was debated by strangers. Ethan's hand had gone numb from gripping the cornmeal sack. He should leave. This wasn't his business. He'd learned the hard way that involving himself in other people's troubles only led to more pain. He'd come to town for supplies, nothing more. His ranch was waiting. The silence was waiting. He took a step toward the door. Then the smallest girl started crying, a thin, hitching sound that cut through the arguments like a knife. The child was shivering violently now, her lips touched with blue. Mara knelt down, trying to wrap her own coat around the girl, but it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Ethan stopped. 8 months ago, on a summer morning that felt like a lifetime past, he'd knelt beside a bed where his wife lay still and silent, her skin already cold. In the cradle next to her, their daughter, barely a day old, had stopped crying an hour before dawn. The doctor had said there was nothing anyone could have done. Childbed fever, fast and merciless. He'd buried them both on a hillside overlooking the ranch, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. He'd built that ranch for them. Every fence post, every timber in the house, every stone in the hearth, all of it had been for the family he thought he'd have. He'd imagined children running through those rooms, his wife's laughter filling the spaces that now held only silence and dust. The life he'd built was waiting for someone to live in it. His feet were moving before his mind caught up. The crowd parted as he walked through, not out of respect, but out of surprise. Ethan Calder hadn't attended a town gathering in months. Most folks had forgotten he existed. He stopped at the wagon, looking up at Vernon Whitlock. "I'll take them." The square fell absolutely silent. Vernon's eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" "I'll take them," Ethan repeated, his voice steady. "All of them. The debt is settled." Vernon studied him with the expression of a man who'd just been offered a deal too good to trust. "You understand what you're agreeing to? This is legal and binding. You take responsibility for all 7, for housing, feeding, clothing. I understand. And you agree the debt is paid in full? No coming back later claiming I cheated you?" "I agree." Vernon's mouth twisted in something that might have been a smile if it had contained any warmth. "Then we have an accord." He turned to Mara. "Gather your things." "We don't have things," Mara said quietly. It was the first time Ethan had heard her voice. It was rougher than he'd expected, worn down by months of grief and fear, but it didn't shake. "Then gather your children and get down from my wagon." Mara lifted the smallest girl into her arms and climbed down carefully, the other children following. They clustered around her like chicks around a hen, watching Ethan with wide, uncertain eyes. Ethan looked at them properly for the first time. The oldest boy had Thomas Whitlock's square jaw, but his eyes were all Mara, dark and wary. The girl next to him, perhaps 12, had tangled auburn hair and a defensive set to her thin shoulders. The 3 middle boys formed a unit unto themselves, ranging from maybe 10 down to 6, each one a variation on the same pinched, hungry face. And the littlest girl, still crying softly in her mother's arms, couldn't have been more than 3 or 4. "My wagon's at the stable," Ethan said to Mara. "It's not far." She nodded once, a sharp jerk of her chin. The crowd parted again as Ethan led them away from the square. Behind him, he could feel Vernon's satisfaction radiating like heat from a stove. The old man had gotten exactly what he wanted, his burden lifted, his debts cleared, and his reputation intact. After all, he'd offered the family to the whole town. It wasn't his fault only one man had been fool enough to accept. Let him gloat, Ethan thought. He'd be paying for this decision soon enough, in ways Vernon Whitlock couldn't begin to calculate. At the stable, Ethan helped load the children into his wagon while Mara climbed up to the bench seat. None of them spoke. The stable boy, a kid named Billy, with more curiosity than sense, stared openly until Ethan fixed him with a look that sent him scurrying back to his work. The ride north out of Coldwater took them past the last scattered homesteads and into open country, where the only breaks in the white landscape were fence lines and the dark shapes of distant cattle. The children huddled together in the wagon bed under a spare canvas tarp Ethan had thrown over them. Mara sat rigid beside him on the bench, her hands folded tightly in her lap. 3 miles passed before she spoke. "Why?" Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "Why what?" "Why did you take us?" "You don't know me. You don't know my children. Vernon said Thomas's debts were $800. She turned to look at him directly now. "Nobody pays $800 for strangers out of kindness, so why?" It was a fair question. Ethan had been asking himself the same thing since the moment the words left his mouth. "I have a ranch," he said finally. "House is built for a family. Been empty too long. Seemed wasteful." "Wasteful?" Mara repeated, and there was something sharp in her tone. "So we're what? Furniture to fill up empty rooms?" "That's not what I meant." "Then say what you mean, Mr. Calder, because I need to know what you expect from me and my children. I need to know what we're walking into." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "I expect you'll work. House needs tending, and there's always more work than one person can handle on a ranch. The children can help with what they're able. In exchange, you'll have a roof, food, safety. That's the arrangement." "That's all?" The question hung in the cold air between them. Ethan heard what she was really asking, what any woman in her position would need to ask a strange man who'd just claimed her and her children like property. "That's all," he said firmly. "You and the children will have the 2 bedrooms in the house. I'll sleep in the barn loft until I can build an addition. You'll earn your keep through work, same as any hired help. Nothing more." Mara studied his face for a long time. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because some of the rigid tension left her shoulders. "The children will work hard," she said. "I'll see to that. And I can cook, clean, mend. I'm stronger than I look." "I believe you." They fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now, less hostile, more cautious. Like two animals circling each other, not yet ready to trust, but willing to consider the possibility. The ranch appeared gradually over the rolling hills, first the barn and outbuildings, then the house itself, a solid timber structure with a stone chimney and a wide porch. It wasn't grand, but it was well built and carefully maintained. Smoke should have been rising from the chimney on a cold day like this, but the house sat dark and quiet. Ethan pulled the wagon up to the porch and set the brake. The children climbed down, stiff from the cold ride, and stood in an uncertain cluster while they took in their new surroundings. The ranch sprawled before them, barn to the east, chicken coop and smokehouse to the south, corrals and pastures stretching out toward the tree line. In the summer, it would be beautiful. Right now, it just looked cold and empty. "Come inside," Ethan said, unlocking the front door. "I'll get a fire going." The interior of the house was neat but sparse. The main room held a large stone hearth, a rough-hewn table with benches, and a few simple chairs. Doorways led to two smaller rooms, the bedrooms Ethan had mentioned. Everything was clean but unused, like a stage set waiting for actors. Mara moved through the space slowly, taking inventory. She ran her hand over the table, tested the pump at the kitchen sink, peered into the cold hearth. The children stayed close to her, watching their mother for cues on how to react. "There's quilts and blankets in the chest by the window," Ethan said, kneeling to build up the fire. "Should be enough to keep everyone warm tonight. I'll bring in more firewood after I see to the horses." "We can manage a fire," Mara said. "I'm sure you can, but it's my job, so I'll do it." He had the fire crackling within minutes, feeding it until the flames caught properly and began pushing warmth into the cold room. The children gravitated toward it immediately, holding out their hands to the heat. "The well is 20 yards behind the house," Ethan continued, standing and brushing bark from his hands. "Water's good and cold. Privy is beyond that near the tree line. Chicken coop's got about a dozen hens. They've been laying poorly since I've been neglecting them, but that should improve with proper care. There's a root cellar stocked with potatoes, turnips, carrots, and onions. Smoked meat in the smokehouse, though supplies are running low. I was planning to butcher a steer next week." Mara was looking at him strangely. "You're telling me where everything is like I'm going to be running this place." "You are," Ethan said simply. "Or you will be in part. I can't manage a ranch and maintain a household. That's why I—" He paused, then pushed ahead. "That's why I needed help." It wasn't quite the truth, but it was close enough to serve. "What about school?" This came from the oldest girl, speaking for the first time. Her voice was quiet but determined. "In Coldwater, there was a school. Samuel and I went sometimes, when Grandfather would let us." "School's in town," Ethan said. 5 miles, too far to walk in winter. So we just don't go?" "I didn't say that. I'm saying it's complicated right now. Let's get through today before we worry about tomorrow." The girl looked like she wanted to argue, but Mara put a hand on her shoulder and she fell silent. "What are your names?" Ethan asked, realizing he'd claimed an entire family without learning even that basic fact. The oldest boy answered first, his voice defensive. "I'm Samuel. I'm 14 Shakian." "Rosalie," said the girl who'd asked about school. "I'm 12. The 3 middle boys went in descending order. "Jacob, I'm 10. "Matthew, 8. "Daniel, I'm 6.5. They all looked to the smallest girl, still clinging to Mara's skirt. She buried her face in the fabric, refusing to speak. "That's Eleanor," Mara said softly. "She's 4. She doesn't talk much anymore. Not since her father died." Ethan felt something twist in his chest. He knelt down, bringing himself to Eleanor's level, though he was careful not to reach for her. "That's all right," he said gently. "You talk when you're ready. No rush." Eleanor peeked at him with one eye, then hid again. "All right," Ethan said, standing. "I need to tend the horses and check the cattle before dark. Mara, there's flour, beans, and salt pork in the pantry. Coffee too, if you drink it. Make whatever you can for supper. We'll figure out a proper routine starting tomorrow." "Wait," Mara said as he turned toward the door. "Mr. Calder. Ethan. Just Ethan. Ethan, then." She hesitated, as if the words were difficult to form. "Thank you for what you did. Whatever your reasons, you didn't have to step forward. You saved us from, I don't know what, but thank you." Ethan nodded once, unable to meet her eyes. "Get settled. I'll be back before full dark." He escaped outside before she could say anything more, pulling his coat tight against the wind. The afternoon sun was already sinking toward the mountains, turning the snow pink and gold. In a few hours, it would be dark, and then the cold would really set in. In the barn, he unhitched the horses and rubbed them down, working with methodical care. The familiar rhythms of the work settled his nerves. This was what he knew: animals, tools, the solid reality of wood and leather and hay, not the complicated tangle of human need and obligation he'd just brought into his home. What had he done? $800. He'd just taken on $800 of debt, plus 7 more mouths to feed, plus the responsibility of keeping them all alive through what was shaping up to be a brutal winter. He should have walked away. Should have bought his cornmeal and ridden back to his quiet, empty house and let Vernon Whitlock's problems remain Vernon. Whitlock's problems. But he hadn't. He couldn't. Because standing in that square, watching those children shiver on Vernon's wagon, he'd seen something he couldn't ignore. He'd seen what happened when the world took everything from someone and then demanded even more. He'd seen the look in Mara's eyes, the same look he saw in his own mirror each morning, the look of someone holding on by threads that were fraying by the hour. And maybe some small part of him thought, if he could keep those threads from breaking for someone else, it might mean his own weren't quite so fragile after all. The work took him into twilight. By the time he returned to the house, smoke was rising steadily from the chimney and golden light glowed in the windows. He paused on the porch, suddenly uncertain. This was his house, but it felt different now, occupied, alive. He could hear voices inside, the clatter of dishes, the thump of small feet on wooden floors. He pushed open the door. The transformation was remarkable. In just a few hours, Mara had brought order to the chaos of their arrival. The table was set with his mismatched plates and cups. The fire burned steadily, warming the room to a comfortable heat. The children had shed their coats and were moving around with tentative purpose. Samuel was bringing in more firewood, Rosalie was helping her mother at the stove, and the younger boys had been set to folding blankets. "Supper's almost ready," Mara said without looking up from the pot she was stirring. "It's just bean soup and cornbread, but it's hot." "Smells good." "Don't lie. It smells like beans and desperation, but it'll fill bellies." Despite everything, Ethan almost smiled. They ate in awkward silence, the only sounds the scraping of spoons against bowls and the crack of the fire. The children wolfed down their portions like they'd been starving, which, Ethan realized with a sick feeling, they probably had been. Vernon had claimed to feed them, but clearly not well or often. "There's more," Mara said when the boys' bowls emptied. "Eat your fill. No sense in being hungry." Second helpings disappeared as quickly as the first. Eleanor ate slowly, methodically, never taking her eyes off Ethan. He pretended not to notice, letting her watch until she satisfied whatever questions she had. After supper, Mara organized the children for bed with the efficiency of a general deploying troops. The 2 bedrooms were small but adequate. The boys would share one, Mara, and the girls the other. There were protests from Samuel about being grouped with the babies, but Mara silenced them with a single look. "We're grateful for what we've been given," she said firmly, "and we'll make it work. No complaints." One by one, the children disappeared into the bedrooms. Ethan could hear them settling in, whispered conversations punctuated by the rustle of blankets and the creak of ropes under mattresses he'd made but never used. Finally, only Mara remained in the main room. She stood by the table wiping down surfaces that were already clean, clearly uncomfortable with the silence. "I meant what I said," Ethan told her. "I'll sleep in the barn. You don't need to worry about—" "I'm not worried," Mara interrupted. "Or rather, I am worried, but not about that. I'm worried about whether we can actually do this, whether I can hold up my end of whatever bargain you think you made. You fed everyone, you organized sleeping arrangements. You made a cold house warm. I'd say you're holding up fine. That's just survival. I'm good at survival. But you need more than that from a ranch hand, don't you? You need actual work. And I don't know the first thing about ranching. You'll learn. The children will learn. That's how it works. Mara finally stopped her restless cleaning and looked at him directly. Why are you being kind to us? And don't tell me again that it's about filling an empty house. I'm not stupid, Ethan. I saw your face when you looked at Eleanor. I saw... She paused, choosing her words carefully. I saw grief, the same grief I carry. So I'm asking again, why? Ethan was quiet for a long time. The fire popped and settled, sending shadows dancing across the walls. I built this place for a family, he said finally. My wife and I, She died last summer. Childbed fever. The baby, too. I'm sorry. So am I. He moved to the hearth, adding another log, though the fire didn't really need it. Point is, this house was meant to be full of life, noise, purpose. Instead, it's been empty. And I thought maybe... He trailed off, unsure how to finish. You thought maybe we could fill it, Mara said softly. Give it the life it was supposed to have. Something like that. That's a lot of weight to put on strangers. I'm not asking you to replace anyone. I'm just asking you to live here, to let the house be what it was built to be. Mara moved to the window, looking out at the darkness beyond. My husband drank, she said quietly. Started after Matthew was born. Got worse with each child after that. I don't know if he was unhappy with me or with his life or just with himself. But the drinking led to debts, and debts led to shame, and shame led to more drinking. Vernon blamed me, said I drove Thomas to it by not being enough, pretty enough, sweet enough, obedient enough. Maybe he was right. He wasn't. You don't know that. I know Vernon Whitlock is a cruel man who twists truth to serve himself, and I know that no amount of a woman being enough stops a man from drinking if that's what he's determined to do. Mara turned from the window, and Ethan saw tears on her cheeks, though her voice remained steady. For 4 months, I watched him feed my children scraps while he ate full meals. Watched him work Samuel until the boy could barely stand. Heard him tell Rosalie she was too stupid to bother educating, and I couldn't do anything because I had nowhere to go and no way to provide for 6 children alone. I was trapped. You're not trapped now. Aren't I? I've just traded one man's house for another's. One set of expectations for a different set. My only expectation is honest work for honest keep. Nothing more, nothing less. You don't owe me gratitude or obedience or anything else. You owe me the same thing I owe you, respect and effort. Mara studied him in the firelight, and Ethan had the sense of being weighed and measured against some internal standard he couldn't see. All right, she said finally. We'll try this. But if it doesn't work, if you change your mind or things become impossible, you'll give me warning? You won't just throw us back to Vernon? You have my word. Then we have an agreement. She moved toward the bedroom, then paused at the doorway. Ethan, one more thing. Yes? Thank you. Not just for today, but for seeing us as people, not property. Vernon treated us like cattle to be traded. You treated us like human beings making a choice. That matters more than you know. Before he could respond, she disappeared into the bedroom and quietly closed the door. Ethan stood alone in the main room, listening to the fire settle and the wind pick up outside. Through the bedroom walls, he could hear the children's breathing evening out into sleep, and Mara's quiet voice singing something soft and wordless. The house wasn't empty anymore. He gathered his bedroll and an extra quilt, banked the fire, and stepped out into the cold night. The barn was dark and silent, but it was familiar territory. He climbed to the loft and made a nest in the hay, wrapping himself against the cold. Through the gaps in the barn walls, he could see the house. Light still glowed in one window, Mara probably, checking on the children one last time before sleep. As he watched, the light went out, leaving only starlight and the white reflection of snow. Ethan closed his eyes and tried to quiet his mind. Tomorrow would bring 100 new challenges. He'd taken on responsibility for 7 lives without fully considering what that meant. There would be struggles and conflicts, misunderstandings and failures. He had no idea if this fragile arrangement would last a week or a year. But tonight, the house on the hill held a family again. And for now, That was enough. The first full day began before dawn with the sound of the barn door scraping open. Ethan had been awake for an hour already, lying in the hayloft watching darkness fade to gray through the cracks in the walls. Sleep had come in fragments, broken by the unfamiliar awareness that the house below held people who depended on him now. He climbed down the ladder stiffly, his breath clouding in the frigid air. The horses shifted in their stalls, nickering softly for their breakfast. Ethan fed them first, then moved to check on the cattle in the near pasture. The herd had weathered the night well enough, clustered together near the windbreak he'd built last autumn. 16 head, not a large operation, but sufficient for a man working alone. Except he wasn't working alone anymore. The thought still felt strange, like a coat that didn't quite fit. He'd grown accustomed to solitude, to making decisions without consultation, to eating when he was hungry and sleeping when he was tired without considering anyone else's needs. Now there were 7 other people to factor into every choice, every plan, every moment of the day. When he returned to the house, smoke was already rising from the chimney. He found Mara at the stove, fully dressed despite the early hour, stirring a pot of what smelled like oatmeal. The main room was warm, the fire built up properly, and the table had been set with bowls and spoons. "You're up early," Ethan said, hanging his coat by the door. "Farmer's hours," Mara replied without turning. "Thomas worked the sawmill, which meant he left before dawn. I got used to rising with him." "The children still sleeping?" "For now. I thought I'd let them rest a bit longer. Yesterday was—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Exhausting." Ethan moved to the basin and washed his hands, the water so cold it made his fingers ache. "I need to ride out to check the fence line along the eastern boundary this morning. Should be back by midday. There's work around the house and barn if you're looking to keep busy." "What kind of work?" "Chicken coop needs mucking out. The hens haven't been laying well, probably because I've been neglecting them. There's mending to do, if you're handy with a needle. The root cellar could use organizing, and the boys might help stack firewood. We'll need a solid supply to get through the rest of winter." Mara ladled oatmeal into 2 bowls and set one in front of Ethan. "I can handle all of that. The children are used to working. Vernon made sure of it." They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the soft scrape of spoons against pottery. Through the window, the sky was lightening to pale blue, promising a clear day. Cold, but clear. "Mara," Ethan said, setting down his spoon. "About Vernon. Is he likely to cause trouble?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, is he the type to accept this arrangement, or is he going to come looking for reasons to take you back?" Mara's hand tightened on her spoon. "Vernon doesn't like to lose. And yesterday, in front of the whole town, he lost control of us. So yes, I think he'll try something eventually. But what can he do? You paid his debt, according to his own terms. He has no legal claim on us now." "Legal claims don't always stop men like Vernon." "No," Mara agreed quietly. "They don't, but we'll face that trouble when it comes. No sense borrowing worry from tomorrow." The children emerged gradually as the sun rose higher. First Samuel, moving with the careful silence of someone trying not to wake others. Then Rosalie, her hair tangled from sleep, followed by the cascade of younger boys. Eleanor appeared last, clutching a rag doll that looked nearly as worn as her dress. They gathered at the table, eyeing the oatmeal with expressions that ranged from hunger to suspicion. Matthew sniffed his bowl cautiously. "It's just oatmeal," Mara said. "Eat it before it gets cold." "Grandfather's oatmeal had bugs in it sometimes," Daniel offered helpfully. "Well, this doesn't. I checked. Now eat." The children obeyed, though several kept glancing at Ethan as if expecting him to snatch the food away. He focused on his own bowl, trying to appear as unthreatening as possible. It was strange being watched so carefully. Every movement felt magnified, significant in ways he didn't fully understand. After breakfast, Ethan outlined the day's work. Samuel would help him with the fence line. Rosalie and Jacob would work with Mara on the chicken coop and household tasks. Matthew and Daniel could start stacking firewood under supervision. Eleanor would stay close to her mother. "What about school?" Rosalie asked, her voice sharp with challenge. "You said we'd talk about it." "I said it was complicated," Ethan replied. "And it is. The schoolhouse is 5 miles away. That's a long walk in winter, especially for the younger ones." "I could walk it. So could Samuel and Jacob." "Maybe, but not today. Today we focus on getting settled. That's what grandfather always said. Not today, maybe tomorrow. And tomorrow never came. Mara put a hand on Rosalie's shoulder, a clear warning, but the girl shook it off. We're not stupid just because we're poor, Rosalie continued, her face flushed. We deserve to learn same as town children. I never said you didn't. Then why won't you let us go? Ethan felt every eye in the room on him. This was a test, he realized, not just from Rosalie, but from all of them. They were measuring him against Vernon, against Thomas, against every other adult who'd made and broken promises to them. You're right, he said finally. You deserve an education. So here's what we'll do. Give me a week to get things stable here, and I'll ride into town to talk to the school teacher. We'll figure out an arrangement that works. But I need your help to make that week successful. Can you do that? Rosalie studied him with narrowed eyes, clearly trying to determine if this was another empty promise. Finally, she nodded. 1 week. 1 week, Ethan agreed. The work began in earnest after that. Ethan saddled his horse while Samuel watched, the boy's hands shoved deep in his coat pockets against the cold. At 14, Samuel was nearly grown, with his father's height starting to show through his thin frame. But there was something guarded in his expression, a wariness that went deeper than normal teenage sullenness. You know how to ride? Ethan asked. Some. Grandfather let me ride the mill horses sometimes when I was younger. Well, you're not riding today. You'll walk with me along the fence line and help with repairs. I want to teach you how to maintain a ranch properly. Why? The blunt question caught Ethan off guard. Because you're here now, and because this kind of work is worth knowing. Grandfather said I'd work at the sawmill when I turned 15. Said it was my birthright since my father worked there. Do you want to work at a sawmill? Samuel was quiet for a long moment. I want to do something that's mine, he said finally. Not his, not my father's. Mine. Then learn ranching. Learn it well. Maybe someday you'll have your own place. Something shifted in Samuel's expression. Not quite hope, but perhaps the shadow of it. All right, show me. They spent the morning walking the eastern boundary, Ethan pointing out weak spots in the fence, showing Samuel how to test the tension of barbed wire, how to reset posts that had worked loose in the frozen ground. The work was cold and demanding, but Samuel attacked it with fierce concentration, as if proving something to himself with every post he secured. Your mother said your father drank, Ethan said as they worked. He kept his tone casual, conversational. Samuel's hand stilled on the wire he was stretching. She tell you why? Said she didn't know. Said Vernon blamed her. Vernon blames everyone but himself for everything. Samuel yanked the wire tight with more force than necessary. My father drank because he was weak, because he couldn't stand up to his own father, because he'd rather drown in a bottle than face his family. The bitterness in the boy's voice was sharp enough to cut. I'm not saying that to excuse him, Samuel continued, or to make you feel sorry for us. I'm just telling you the truth. My father was a coward, and he left us with nothing but debts and shame. You're not responsible for his choices. Tell that to the people in town who cross the street when they see us coming. Tell that to Vernon, who looked at us like we were livestock to be sold off. Ethan secured the post they'd been working on and moved to the next section. People will think what they want to think. All you can control is who you choose to be. Your father's choices were his, yours are yours. Samuel was quiet after that, but he worked with renewed focus, as if channeling his anger into something productive. By the time they finished the fence line and headed back toward the house, the sun was high overhead and both of them were sweating despite the cold. At the house, they found chaos of a productive sort. Mara had organized the children like a military commander, and the results were visible everywhere. The chicken coop gleamed, freshly mucked and rebedded with clean straw. The hens, perhaps sensing the change in management, were already scratching about with renewed energy. A pile of firewood now stood neatly stacked against the side of the house, and through the window, Ethan could see Rosalie working at the table with needle and thread, mending what looked like a mountain of clothes. How'd it go? Mara asked when Ethan and Samuel came inside. Her sleeves were rolled up and her hands were red from cold water, but there was color in her cheeks and something almost like satisfaction in her expression. Fence line secure, Ethan reported. Samuel's a quick learner. The boy's face flushed slightly at the praise, but he said nothing. We found 3 eggs, Mara said, gesturing to the table where 3 brown eggs sat in a bowl. Not much, but it's a start. I'm hoping with better care the hens will produce more consistently. They will. They're good birds, just neglected. I know the feeling, Mara said, and there was something wry in her tone. That afternoon, Ethan showed Jacob and Matthew how to care for the horses, how to curry them properly, check their hooves for stones, measure out grain. The boys were tentative at first, nervous around animals so much larger than themselves, but they warmed to the work gradually. Matthew in particular seemed fascinated by the horses, running his small hands over their flanks with something close to wonder. "Can I ride one?" he asked. "Not today, but maybe soon, if you keep learning." "Promise?" Ethan hesitated. Promises were dangerous things to make to children who'd been disappointed too many times already. "I promise I'll teach you if you prove you can handle the responsibility." It was a careful answer, qualified and conditional, but Matthew accepted it with a grin that showed the gap where he'd lost a front tooth. Supper that evening was a more elaborate affair than the night before. Mara had found Ethan's stores of dried beans and salt pork and somehow transformed them into something approaching a proper meal. There was cornbread again, this time with a precious bit of butter scraped from the crock in the cold pantry. The children ate with slightly less desperation than the previous night, though their plates still emptied quickly. "Tomorrow I'll need to butcher that steer," Ethan said. "It's a 2-person job at minimum. Samuel, you ever helped with butchering?" "Some. Grandfather had me help when he slaughtered hogs." "This will be similar. We'll do it early, before the day warms up. The cold will help preserve the meat." Mara looked up from her plate. "I can help with the processing, cutting, salting, smoking. I've done it before." "Appreciated. We'll make it a full operation then." That night, after the children had been settled in their rooms and Mara had retreated to her own bed, Ethan sat alone by the fire, listening to the house settle around him. It had been only 2 days, but already patterns were forming, rhythms of work and rest, of shared meals and divided labor. The children were beginning to relax incrementally, their shoulders not quite so tight, their eyes not quite so watchful. But Ethan knew this calm was fragile. They were still strangers sharing space, bound by necessity rather than affection. Trust would take time to build, and it could shatter in an instant if he made the wrong move or broke the wrong promise. He thought about Rosalie's challenge that morning, her demand for school. She'd been testing him, seeing if he was like Vernon, all talk and no follow-through. He'd bought himself a week, but that week would pass quickly. He'd need to make good on his word or lose whatever small measure of trust he'd begun to earn. The next morning brought the grim work of butchering. Ethan selected a young steer from the herd and led it to the area behind the barn where he'd set up a butchering station. Samuel arrived just after dawn, his face pale but determined. "You don't have to help if you don't want to," Ethan said. "I know, but I want to learn. If I'm going to live on a ranch, I should know how to do ranch work. All of it." The work was bloody and difficult, but Samuel never flinched. Ethan talked him through each step, the quick kill, the bleeding, the skinning, and gutting. It was brutal education, but necessary for life on the frontier. By mid-morning, they had the carcass quartered and hanging, ready for Mara to begin processing. She appeared with Rosalie in tow, both women carrying knives and wearing aprons fashioned from flour sacks. Mara surveyed the carcass with a practiced eye. "Good clean work," she said. "We can save almost everything." For the rest of the day, the homestead became a hive of coordinated activity. Mara and Rosalie butchered the quarters into manageable cuts. Ethan and Samuel built up the fires in the smokehouse and prepared the salt brine. Jacob and Matthew were tasked with keeping the fires fed and steady. Even Daniel and Eleanor had jobs, carrying scraps to be rendered for tallow, fetching water, running messages between the workstations. It was exhausting work, but there was something almost cheerful in the effort. The children bantered with each other, their voices rising in the cold air. Mara hummed while she worked, some tune Ethan didn't recognize. And when Matthew got salt in his eye and started crying, it was Samuel who knelt down to help him, speaking in a gentle voice Ethan hadn't heard from the boy before. By evening, the smokehouse was full. The brine barrels were packed with pork and beef, and the children were covered in a combination of blood, salt, and exhaustion. They gathered around the kitchen table where Mara had set out a feast made from the fresh liver and heart. organ meat that wouldn't keep and needed to be eaten quickly. To honest work, Ethan said, raising his cup of water. The children looked uncertain about the toast, but Mara lifted her cup as well. To honest work, she echoed. One by one, the children joined in, even Eleanor, who held up her cup with both small hands. 3 days later, Ethan rode into Coldwater to make good on his promise to Rosalie. The town looked the same as it had the week before, cold, quiet, and slightly unwelcoming. He tied his horse outside the schoolhouse, a small timber building at the edge of town, and knocked on the door. The schoolteacher who answered was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. "Mr. Calder," she said, clearly surprised, "I heard you'd taken in the Whitlock family." "I did. That's why I'm here. 3 of the children are school age. I'd like to arrange for them to attend." Miss Patterson's expression shifted from surprise to skepticism. "The school term is already well underway. The children would be behind." "They'll catch up." "And the matter of tuition? The school charges 50 cents per child per month. I'll pay it." "That's $1.50 a month, Mr. Calder, for children who aren't even yours." Ethan felt his jaw tighten. "They're in my household. That makes them my responsibility. Will you teach them or not?" Miss Patterson studied him for a long moment. "I'll teach them, but I expect regular attendance. I won't have children coming and going as they please, disrupting the other students. They'll be here every day the weather allows." "And Vernon Whitlock? He's on the school board. He may have opinions about this arrangement." "Vernon Whitlock's opinions are his own problem. Do we have an agreement?" "We do. They can start Monday." Ethan paid the first month's tuition on the spot, coins that represented a significant portion of his carefully hoarded cash. But as he rode back to the ranch, he felt something close to satisfaction. He'd made a promise, and he'd kept it. That had to count for something. When he told the children that evening, Rosalie's face lit up with the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "Really? We can really go?" "Starting Monday. You, Samuel, and Jacob, the younger ones will wait until they're a bit older." "What about the distance? It's 5 miles." "I'll take you in the wagon when weather permits. When it doesn't, you'll walk. I'm trusting you 3 to look after each other." Samuel shifted uncomfortably. "I don't need schooling. I'm nearly 15. I should be working." "You can do both. Mornings at school, afternoons and evenings here. It's not negotiable." For a moment, Ethan thought Samuel might argue. But then Mara spoke up. "Your father never finished school," she said quietly. "He always regretted it. Don't make the same mistake." Something passed between mother and son, some understanding Ethan couldn't fully grasp. Finally, Samuel nodded. "All right, I'll go." That Sunday, Mara spent the afternoon preparing the children for school. She mended their best clothes, such as they were, and scrubbed them until their faces shone. She braided Rosalie's hair with careful precision and made Samuel wash behind his ears 3 times. By the time she finished, the 3 school-bound children looked almost respectable. "You'll represent this household well," she told them. "You'll be polite, attentive, and grateful for the opportunity you've been given. Do you understand?" "Yes, Mama," they chorused. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. Ethan hitched the wagon before dawn and helped the 3 children climb aboard. They huddled together under blankets, breath clouding in the frigid air. Mara stood on the porch watching, Eleanor balanced on her hip. "You'll pick them up this afternoon?" she called. "I'll be there when school lets out." The ride to town was quiet. The children seemed nervous, and Ethan couldn't blame them. They'd be entering a classroom full of children who'd witnessed their humiliation in the town square just a week ago. It would take courage to walk through that door. At the schoolhouse, Miss Patterson stood waiting, her expression unreadable. The other students were already inside. Ethan could hear the murmur of voices and the scrape of benches. "We'll take good care of them, Mr. Calder," Miss Patterson said. Samuel, Rosalie, and Jacob climbed down from the wagon, moving with visible reluctance toward the schoolhouse door. "Hold on!" Ethan called. They turned back and he saw the fear in their faces, carefully hidden but unmistakable. "You belong here same as anyone. Don't let anyone tell you different." Rosalie straightened her shoulders. "Yes, sir." They disappeared into the schoolhouse, and Ethan climbed back onto the wagon. He had work waiting at the ranch, fences to check, animals to tend, 100 tasks that filled the daylight hours. But he found himself reluctant to leave, as if by staying he could somehow protect those 3 children from whatever judgment waited inside. "Mr. Calder!" He turned to find Vernon Whitlock standing by the wagon, appearing as if summoned by Ethan's thoughts. The old man looked the same as always, broad-shouldered, hard-faced, radiating an authority he felt was his by right. "Vernon, saw you dropping off the children. Heard you'd enrolled them in school." "That's right." "Must be costing you a fair amount. $1.50 a month, plus the time to bring them back and forth." Vernon's eyes gleamed with something unpleasant. "That's in addition to feeding and housing 7 extra mouths. Quite a burden for a man working alone." "I'm managing. Are you? Or are you beginning to realize what a foolish bargain you made?" Vernon stepped closer, his voice dropping. "I'm not an unreasonable man, Calder. If you found the arrangement unworkable, I'm willing to discuss alternatives. Take the family back, call the debt settled. No shame in admitting you bit off more than you could chew." Ethan felt anger kindle in his chest, hot and sharp. "The arrangement is fine. The family stays with me. For now, perhaps. But winter's not over, and you've got months of mouths to feed ahead of you. When your supplies run low and your patience runs out, remember I made this offer. I'll remember you tried to buy back people like they were livestock. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." Ethan snapped the reins, driving the wagon away before he said something he'd regret. In the side mirror, he could see Vernon standing in the street, watching him go with an expression that promised this conversation wasn't over. Back at the ranch, Mara met him at the door with a cup of coffee and an anxious expression. "How were they? Were they all right?" "They walked in brave as could be. Miss Patterson seems fair enough. They'll be fine." "You don't know that. You don't know what those other children might say to them." "No, I don't. But they're strong, Mara. All 3 of them. They'll handle whatever comes." She wrapped her hands around her own coffee cup, seeking warmth. "Vernon came to see you, didn't he? I saw him from the window when you left." "He did. What did he want?" "To remind me what a burden you are, to offer to take you back." Mara's hands tightened on the cup. "And what did you say?" "I told him no." "He won't accept that. Vernon never accepts no." "Then he'll have to learn." Ethan set down his cup and met her eyes directly. "I meant what I said that first night. You and the children are under my protection now. Vernon doesn't get to change that just because he's decided he wants you back. It's not about wanting us. It's about control. Vernon can't stand that you outmaneuvered him in front of the whole town. He'll find a way to punish you for it. Let him try." But as Ethan returned to the day's work, Vernon's words echoed in his mind. Winter wasn't over. Supplies would run low. And there would come a time when the cost of his impulsive decision in the town square would have to be reckoned with. The question was whether he'd still believe the cost was worth it when that reckoning came. The reckoning Vernon promised came sooner than expected, though not in the way Ethan anticipated. It arrived on a Wednesday afternoon 3 weeks after the children started school, in the form of Sheriff Tom Hadley, riding up to the ranch with a folded document in his saddlebag and an apologetic expression on his weathered face. Ethan was in the barn repairing tack when he heard the horse approach. Through the open door, he watched the sheriff dismount and tie his gelding to the porch rail. Mara appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron, and Ethan saw her stiffen at the sight of the lawmen. He set down the leather he'd been working and walked out to meet them. "Sheriff," Ethan said, keeping his voice neutral, "this is unexpected." Hadley touched the brim of his hat, first to Mara, then to Ethan. "Wish I was here for a social call, Ethan, but I've got official business that can't wait." "What kind of business?" The sheriff pulled the folded document from his coat. "Vernon Whitlock has filed a legal challenge. He's claiming the arrangement you made in the town square was made under duress and without proper legal authority. He's demanding the return of his daughter-in-law and grandchildren, plus compensation for damages." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. "That's insane. There was no duress. He offered them publicly, and I accepted publicly. There were 50 witnesses. I know that. You know that. But Vernon's hired himself a lawyer from Helena, fellow named Blackwood, who specializes in property disputes. They filed papers with the territorial court claiming you essentially stole Vernon's property." "We're not property," Mara said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "We're human beings." "Ma'am, I agree with you completely, But the law is complicated, especially when it comes to family obligations and debts. Hadley looked genuinely pained. Vernon claims that as head of the Whitlock family, he had legal authority over his son's widow and children. He says the public offering was just theatrics meant to shame the town, not a legitimate transfer of guardianship. That's a lie, Ethan said flatly. He wanted to be rid of them. He said so explicitly. Again, I believe you, but Blackwood's built a case around Vernon's supposed intention versus what actually happened. They're arguing that no reasonable person would actually give away family members, so the offer couldn't have been legally binding. Mara's hand found the porch railing, gripping it so hard her knuckles went white. So what happens now? There's going to be a hearing. Judge Morrison will ride out from Helena next month to hear the case. Both sides will present evidence and testimony. The judge will make a ruling. And until then? Ethan asked. Until then, things stay as they are. You keep the family, but you can't leave the territory. And Vernon's been granted supervised visitation rights, 1 hour a week, here at the ranch, with me present to ensure everything stays civil. No. The word came from Mara like a whip crack. Absolutely not. I will not subject my children to that man's presence. Not after everything he's done. Hadley's expression softened with sympathy. Mrs. Whitlock, I understand. Truly I do. But if you refuse, it gives weight to Vernon's claim that you're being held against your will. The judge needs to see that the children are safe and that they have the option of maintaining family relationships. Family, Mara spat the word. Vernon wouldn't know family if it bit him. He starved my children. He worked Samuel like a mule. He told Rosalie she was worthless. And now he wants visitation rights? He wants them back, Hadley said gently. The visitation is just legal maneuvering. Blackwood's strategy is to document that you want to see Vernon, that the children miss their grandfather, and that this whole situation is Ethan imposing his will on an unwilling family. If you refuse to cooperate, it plays right into their hands. Ethan stepped forward. So we let Vernon come here. Let him poison the children's minds. Let him gather ammunition to use against us in court. You let him come here and you document everything. Every word he says, every interaction with the children. I'll be present as witness. If he steps out of line, if he threatens or manipulates, it goes on record. But you have to give him the rope to hang himself with. That's asking a lot, Ethan said. I know, but it's the only way through this that doesn't end with you losing them before the hearing even starts. Hadley looked between them, his expression grave. Vernon's got money and he's got influence. This lawyer he's hired doesn't come cheap, and Blackwood doesn't take cases he thinks he'll lose. You need to take this seriously. After the sheriff left, Mara stood on the porch staring at the horizon where the mountains cut jagged edges against the pale sky. Ethan waited, giving her space to process what they'd just learned. Inside, he could hear Matthew and Daniel playing some kind of chasing game, their laughter echoing through the rooms. Eleanor was singing to herself in that wordless way she had, a sound like wind through grass. I won't go back to him, Mara said finally. I'd rather take the children and run, disappear into the mountains or head for Canada. Anything but go back. Running would prove Vernon right, that you were coerced, that you're not here by choice. And staying means watching him try to manipulate my children, watching him plant seeds of doubt. He'll tell them I'm an unfit mother. He'll tell them they'd be better off in his care. He'll promise them things you can't provide. Ethan moved to stand beside her, careful not to crowd her space. Then we make sure the children know the truth before he arrives. We prepare them for what's coming, and we trust that they're smart enough to see through his lies. You have a lot of faith in children who've been disappointed by every adult in their lives, except you. I have faith in you. You've kept them alive, kept them together, kept them human through everything Vernon put you through. That doesn't disappear because a lawyer files papers. Mara turned to look at him, and Ethan saw tears tracking down her cheeks, though her expression remained fierce. Why are you doing this? You could hand us back right now. Save yourself the legal fees, the trouble, the risk. Vernon would probably even forgive the debt just to get his way. I don't want his forgiveness, and I'm not handing you back. But why? You barely know us. We've been here less than a month. What are we to you that's worth fighting a legal battle for? Ethan searched for words that would explain what he barely understood himself. When I lost my wife and daughter, this place became a tomb. Every room echoed with who should have been in it. Every meal was a reminder of chairs that should have been filled. I was living in a monument to grief, and it was killing me by inches. He gestured toward the house, where the children's voices still filtered through the walls. Then you arrived, and suddenly the house was what it was always meant to be, full of life and noise and purpose. The children run through those rooms. You cook at that stove. Samuel's learning to work the ranch. Rosalie's reading books by the fire. Even Eleanor's starting to hum around me without hiding. So we're filling a gap for you, playing the parts of the family you lost. No, you're becoming the family I have. There's a difference. Ethan's voice roughened with emotion he rarely let surface. I'm not trying to replace anyone. I'm trying to build something new from the wreckage we've both survived. And maybe that's selfish. Maybe I'm doing this as much for myself as for you. But I don't think that makes it wrong. Mara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. You're a strange man, Ethan called her. I've been called worse. That's not an insult. Strange, in this case, means surprising, decent. Nothing like what I expected from a lonely rancher taking in strangers. She took a shaky breath. All right, we'll face this together, but I want to say in how we handle Vernon's visits. And I want your word that if this goes badly, if the judge rules against us, you'll help me and the children disappear before Vernon can take us back. You have my word. That evening, after the school-bound children returned and supper had been cleared away, Ethan and Mara gathered the family in the main room. The children sensed the seriousness of the moment, settling into unusual stillness. Even the younger boys stopped their fidgeting. We need to talk about your grandfather, Mara began, her voice steady despite the difficulty of the words. He's filed legal papers claiming that our living here isn't proper. He wants a judge to send us back to him. Samuel's face went dark with anger. He can't do that. We're not his anymore. Legally, it's complicated. He's arguing that what happened in the town square wasn't a real agreement. But Mr. Calder paid the debt, Rosalie protested. Everyone heard grandfather offer us. Everyone saw Mr. Calder accept. I know, and we'll tell the judge all of that. But until the hearing happens, your grandfather has been granted visitation rights. He'll come here once a week, with the sheriff present, to see you. The room erupted in protests. Jacob and Matthew started talking over each other, their voices rising in panic. Daniel grabbed onto Mara's skirt. Even Eleanor, who rarely reacted to much, pressed closer to her mother with wide eyes. I won't talk to him, Samuel said flatly. You can't make me. Nobody's making you do anything, Ethan interjected. But we need you all to understand what's at stake. Your grandfather is going to try to convince the judge that you want to live with him, that you're unhappy here, that Mrs. Whitlock and I are somehow forcing you to stay against your will. That's stupid, Jacob said. We like it here. We get to go to school. We get enough food. Nobody hits us or calls us worthless. The casual way he said it, the implication that being hit and called worthless had been normal, made Ethan's hands clench into fists. Mara's face had gone pale. Did Vernon hit you? She asked quietly. Sometimes, Jacob said with a shrug. Not hard. Just when we were too slow or broke something. It wasn't that bad. It was bad enough, Samuel said, his voice tight. And it's not happening again. I'll tell the judge exactly what kind of man grandfather is. You'll tell the truth, Mara corrected. All of you will tell the truth about what life was like before and what it's like now. But you'll do it calmly and respectfully, because we can't give them any reason to think we've turned you against Vernon. But we are against him, Rosalie pointed out. Then you're against him because of his actions, not because we told you to be. That's an important distinction. Mara looked at each of her children in turn. When your grandfather visits, you'll be polite. You'll answer his questions honestly, and you'll remember that the sheriff will be watching and listening to everything that happens. Vernon will be on his best behavior because he knows he's being observed. So will you. What if he promises us things? Matthew asked, like he did before. What kind of things did he promise you before? New clothes, a pony. Said he'd let me work at the sawmill when I got older, same as father. Matthew's face scrunched up with memory. But he never did any of it. Said we had to earn it first, but nothing we did was ever good enough. If he makes promises during the visits, listen politely and don't argue, Mara instructed. Then tell me and Mr. Calder immediately afterward. We'll write down everything he says. It'll be evidence. The children absorbed this with varying degrees of understanding. The older ones grasped the gravity of the situation, while the younger ones seemed more confused than worried. Eleanor had fallen asleep against Mara's shoulder, her small body relaxed in the trust that her mother would handle whatever trouble was coming. After the children had been sent to bed, Ethan sat with Mara by the dying fire, both of them too restless for sleep. "I need to find a lawyer," Ethan said, "someone who can counter whatever Blackwood throws at us. Lawyers cost money, good ones cost a lot of money. I have some savings. The ranch turns enough profit to keep me comfortable. It'll be tight, but I can manage." Mara shook her head. "You've already spent $1.50 a month on schooling. You're feeding 9 people instead of 1. You slaughtered your steer early because we needed the meat, and now you're talking about hiring a lawyer to fight a case that isn't even yours to fight. It is mine. The moment I claimed you in that square, it became mine." "You claimed me like I was property," Mara said, but there was no heat in her voice. "Isn't that what we're fighting against? Vernon treating us like property he could dispose of? It's different. Is it? You paid a debt and took possession of 7 people. How is that different from Vernon offering us to settle that same debt?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment, staring into the embers. "The difference is what happens after. Vernon offered you to get rid of a burden. I accepted because I saw people who needed help and I had the means to provide it. What we build from that moment forward is what matters. And what we're building is a household where everyone has value and agency, where children go to school and adults share the work, where nobody is property. And yet the law might not see it that way. The law might say Vernon has rights as the family patriarch, as the grandfather, as the man who sheltered us when Thomas died. Then we change what the law sees. We prove that this household is legitimate, that the children are thriving, that you're here by choice." "Am I?" Mara asked softly. "Here by choice?" The question hung between them like smoke. Ethan met her eyes across the firelight and saw the genuine uncertainty there. She wasn't challenging him. She was asking herself out loud whether she'd truly chosen this life or simply accepted it as the least terrible option available. "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "You were in an impossible situation. I offered an escape. Maybe that's not the same as a real choice. But what I can tell you is that every day you stay, that becomes more of a choice. Every day you choose to work this ranch, to raise your children here, to share meals and make this house a home, those are choices, real ones. And if I chose to leave, to take the children and go somewhere else, then I'd help you leave. I'd give you money for the journey and supplies to get wherever you were going. I'd even testify in court that you left of your own free will if it came to that." Mara studied him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You mean that?" "I do." "You're a very strange man, Ethan called her," she said again, echoing her earlier words. "Most men would say the debt bought them rights, that the arrangement was binding regardless of my feelings about it. I'm not most men, and you're not a possession I bought. You're a person who deserves to decide her own path, even if that path leads away from you and this ranch." Even then, Mara was quiet for a long time, her eyes distant with thought. Finally she spoke. "I'm not leaving. Not because I'm trapped, or because I have no other options. I'm staying because this is the first place in years where my children are safe and fed and allowed to be children. Because you've kept every promise you've made to us. Because this house feels more like home than anywhere I've lived since I married Thomas." She paused, then added, "And because I think you need us as much as we need you, even if you won't admit it." "I might have admitted it. Earlier. You admitted you wanted the house to be full. That's not the same as admitting you need the people filling it." Ethan felt something shift in his chest, some wall he'd built after his wife died beginning to crack. "Maybe I'm learning the difference." Vernon's first visit came on Saturday morning. Ethan spotted the wagon from a distance, Vernon driving, Sheriff Hadley riding alongside. The children had been prepared, dressed in their cleanest clothes and instructed to be calm and truthful, but preparation couldn't quite mask the tension that gripped the household as the wagon rolled to a stop outside. Vernon climbed down stiffly, his expression unreadable. He dressed formally for the occasion, wearing a suit that Ethan suspected was meant to emphasize his prosperity compared to the rough work clothes Ethan wore. Hadley dismounted and took up a position near the porch, notebook in hand. "Mara," Vernon said, his voice carrying false warmth, "it's good to see you looking well." "Vernon?" Mara's tone was flat, giving nothing away. "And my grandchildren. Come here, let me look at you." The children moved forward reluctantly, forming a line like soldiers under inspection. Vernon walked along, studying each one with theatrical concern. "Samuel, you've grown. Hard work agrees with you." He turned to Rosalie. "And you, child, are you keeping up with your studies?" "Yes, sir." "Good, good. Education is important, even if—" He trailed off meaningfully, leaving the implication hanging. "Even if you're just a girl. Even if you'll never amount to much." Ethan saw Rosalie's jaw tighten, but she said nothing. Vernon moved down the line, making similar observations, each one laden with subtle criticism or false praise. When he reached Eleanor, he knelt down with a show of grandfatherly affection. "And little Eleanor, have you been a good girl?" Eleanor stared at him with those wide, solemn eyes and said nothing. Vernon's smile thinned. "She still doesn't talk much?" he asked Mara. "She talks when she has something to say." "Pity. A silent child is often a troubled one. Perhaps she'd do better in a more stable environment." "This environment is perfectly stable," Ethan said, speaking for the first time. Vernon straightened, turning his attention to Ethan with barely concealed contempt. "Is it? A ranch run by a widower with no experience raising children? A woman working herself to exhaustion, trying to maintain a household she has no legal right to? Children pulled from their family and forced into a stranger's care?" "Nobody forced anything. You offered them and I accepted. I offered them temporary shelter until a proper arrangement could be made. You took advantage of a grandfather's grief and desperation." That's not how anyone else remembers it," Hadley interjected quietly. "I've taken statements from several witnesses. They all confirm you offered the family permanently to settle debts." Vernon's face flushed with anger, but he controlled it quickly. "Then the witnesses misunderstood. My intention was always to maintain my family. Temporarily placing them in another's care doesn't dissolve the bonds of blood." "Blood doesn't give you the right to starve children," Mara said, her voice cold, "or work them like animals, or tell them they're worthless. I discipline them. There's a difference. A concept Mr. Calder here might learn before he ruins them with softness." Vernon turned back to the children. "Tell me truthfully, have you been happy here? Has this stranger treated you well, or are you afraid to speak up?" Samuel stepped forward, his young face set with determination. "We're happy here. We get enough to eat. We go to school. Mr. Calder treats us with respect. We're not afraid of anything except being forced to go back to you." "Samuel," Vernon's voice sharpened, "you've been poisoned against me. Can't you see that? This man has turned you against your own blood. You turned me against you all by yourself. Every time you hit me for being too slow. Every time you told me I'd never be as good as father. Every time you—" "That's enough," Mara interrupted, putting a hand on Samuel's shoulder. "We're not doing this." Vernon's expression had gone hard as granite. "You see, Sheriff, you see how they've been coached? The boy would never speak to me that way if he hadn't been manipulated." "The boy's speaking his mind," Hadley said, making notes. "That's what I'm here to observe. His mind has been corrupted. These children need to be removed from the situation before more damage is done." "The only damage being done is by you," Ethan said, his patience finally breaking. "You came here supposedly to visit with your grandchildren, but all you've done is criticize and accuse. You haven't asked them about school, haven't asked what they're learning, haven't shown one genuine moment of interest in their well-being. I don't need lessons on family from a man who couldn't even keep his own wife alive." The words hit like a physical blow. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs, felt the old grief surge up fresh and raw. Beside him, Mara drew in a sharp breath. "That was uncalled for," Hadley said sharply. "Was it? We're talking about fitness to raise children. A man who let his wife and child die has no moral authority to question my methods." "My wife died of fever," Ethan said, his voice deadly quiet. "There was nothing anyone could have done." "So you say. But I wonder what really happened in that cabin. Whether you failed her through negligence or incompetence. Whether—" "Stop!" Mara's voice cut through Vernon's words like a blade. You will not come to this house and slander a man who's shown more kindness to my children in 3 weeks than you showed in 4 months. You will not use grief as a weapon, and you will not—" Her voice broke slightly, then strengthened. "You will not pretend this visit is about family when we both know it's about control." Vernon's eyes narrowed. "Be careful, Mara. Remember who sheltered you when Thomas died. Remember who paid his debts. Remember where you'd be without my charity." "I remember exactly where I'd be. Starving in your house, watching my children work themselves sick, listening to you tell them daily that they were burdens you resented bearing. I remember all of it, Vernon, and I'm grateful to be anywhere but there." "Your hour's up," Hadley said, checking his pocket watch. "Time to go, Vernon." Vernon looked like he wanted to argue, but the sheriff's expression brooked no disagreement. He turned to the children one last time. "I'll see you next week. Think about what I've said. Think about whether you want to stay with strangers or return to family who truly cares for you." "We've already thought about it," Rosalie said quietly. "We choose to stay." Vernon's face twisted with something ugly, but he mastered it before climbing back into his wagon. Hadley mounted his horse, and the two of them rode away, leaving silence in their wake. The children stood frozen on the porch until the wagon disappeared over the hill. Then, as if released from a spell, they scattered, Samuel stalking off toward the barn, Rosalie fleeing to the house, the younger boys running toward the creek. Only Eleanor remained, still standing exactly where Vernon had left her, her small face expressionless. Mara knelt down and gathered her youngest daughter into her arms. Eleanor didn't cry, didn't speak, but she buried her face in her mother's shoulder and held on tight. "It's over," Mara whispered. "He's gone." Ethan stood on the porch, Vernon's words still echoing in his mind. A man who couldn't even keep his own wife alive. The accusation was ridiculous, unfounded, meant only to wound. But it had found its mark anyway, driving straight into the core of guilt he'd carried since last summer. "Ethan," Mara had stood up, Eleanor still in her arms. "You know what he said wasn't true." "Don't I?" "No, you don't. Fever takes who it takes. You couldn't have saved them any more than I could have saved Thomas from his own weakness." "But what if—" "No, there are no what ifs. There's only what happened, and what we do now." She shifted Eleanor to her other hip. "Vernon said that to hurt you, to plant doubt. Don't give him that victory." Ethan nodded, though the words still stung. "I should check on Samuel." He found the boy in the barn, pitchforking hay with violent intensity. Samuel didn't look up when Ethan entered, just kept driving the fork into the pile with barely controlled fury. "I wanted to hit him," Samuel said without preamble. "Wanted to knock him down right there in front of everyone. I know the feeling. But I didn't, because Mother said to stay calm, and I didn't want to give him ammunition for court. So I just stood there while he tried to twist everything, tried to make it sound like we're prisoners here instead of—" He paused, searching for words. "Instead of home. Is that what this is becoming for you? Home." Samuel finally stopped his assault on the hay pile and leaned on the pitchfork, breathing hard. "I never had a real home. Not one that felt safe. Father was always drunk and angry. Grandfather was always critical and mean. This place," he gestured around the barn, "this is the first time I've felt like maybe I could have a future that wasn't just surviving." "You'll have that future, Samuel, whatever it takes." "How can you promise that? The judge might rule against us. Vernon might win. Then we'll find another way. But I'm not giving up on this family. Not without a fight." Samuel studied him for a long moment, and Ethan saw the boy measuring him the same way Mara had, trying to determine if these were just words or genuine commitment. "All right," Samuel said finally. "Then I won't give up either." That night, the house felt different, tighter, more unified. Vernon's visit had been meant to divide them, to plant seeds of doubt and fear. Instead, it had crystallized something that had been forming since that first day. They weren't just people sharing a roof anymore. They were becoming something more solid, more permanent. They were becoming a family forged not by blood but by choice and shared determination to protect what they'd built. And when the judge arrived next month, they'd show him exactly what that meant. The lawyer Ethan found was nothing like the slick Helena attorney Vernon had hired. Marcus Webb operated out of a cramped office above the dry goods store in Coldwater, and his suit showed signs of careful mending at the cuffs. But his eyes were sharp, and his handshake was firm. And when Ethan laid out the situation, Webb listened with the focused attention of a man who understood that lives hung in the balance. "Vernon Whitlock," Webb said, leaning back in his chair until it creaked. "I've had dealings with him before. He doesn't like to lose." That seems to be a common observation. It's more than pride with Vernon. It's philosophy. He believes the world has a natural order. Men like him at the top, everyone else arranged below according to their usefulness. You disrupted that order when you took in his daughter-in-law and grandchildren. He won't rest until the order is restored. Can you beat Blackwood? Webb was quiet for a moment, studying the notes he'd taken during Ethan's recounting. Blackwood's good. He wouldn't have taken this case if he didn't think he could win. He'll argue patriarchal rights, family unity, the sanctity of blood relations. He'll paint you as an interloper who exploited Vernon's momentary weakness. He'll suggest that Mrs. Whitlock is either coerced or morally compromised. None of that is true. Truth and legal strategy don't always align, Mr. Calder. Blackwood will twist facts to serve his narrative. We need to twist them to serve ours. I'm not interested in twisting anything. I want to present the truth that Vernon offered his family publicly to settle debts. I accepted, and they've thrived under my care. Noble sentiment, but the law doesn't care about thriving. It cares about legitimacy. Right now, your arrangement exists in legal gray area. You're not Mrs. Whitlock's husband. You're not the children's father or legal guardian. You're a man who paid a debt and received people in exchange, which, as Vernon's lawyer will point out, sounds dangerously close to human trafficking. The words hit Ethan like cold water. So what do I do? Webb tapped his pencil against his desk, thinking. We need to establish legal standing. Right now, you have none. Mrs. Whitlock has some as the children's mother, but as a widow with debts, her position is weak. Vernon has standing as the grandfather and the man who paid Thomas's obligations. There has to be a way to counter that. There is, but you're not going to like it. Webb met Ethan's eyes directly. You marry Mrs. Whitlock. Make the arrangement legally binding. As her husband, you'd have the right to shelter her and her children. As the children's stepfather, you'd have parental authority that supersedes Vernon's grandparental claims. Ethan felt the floor shift beneath him. I can't just marry her. We barely know each other. You know each other well enough to run a household together. Well enough to raise 6 children together. Well enough to stand before a judge and defend each other. The question isn't whether you know each other. It's whether you're willing to make your arrangement legally legitimate. She'd never agree. We have an understanding, but marriage is different. I know. But consider the alternative. If we go to court with the current arrangement, Blackwood will eviscerate you. He'll make you look like a man taking advantage of a desperate widow. He'll suggest impropriety. He'll imply that you're using the children as unpaid labor while enjoying the benefits of Mrs. Whitlock's domestic work without the responsibilities of marriage. And the judge, being a conservative man from Helena who believes in traditional family structures, will likely agree. Ethan stood and moved to the window, looking down at the street below, where ordinary people went about ordinary business, unburdened by impossible choices. And if we marry, what then? Then Blackwood's entire case collapses. You're not a stranger exploiting a family. You're a husband and stepfather providing for your household. The arrangement isn't questionable. It's conventional. Vernon loses his legal standing because grandparents have no rights over children in intact marriages unless there's proven abuse or neglect, which there isn't, which makes Vernon's case essentially moot. Oh, Blackwood will still argue. He'll claim the marriage is a sham, rush through to avoid legal consequences. But if you and Mrs. Whitlock present a united front, if the children testify to being happy and well cared for, the judge will have no grounds to interfere. Ethan turned from the window. How much time do I have to decide? The hearing's in 3 weeks. If you're going to marry, it needs to happen soon, ideally within the next week. Otherwise, it looks too obviously like a legal maneuver. It is a legal maneuver. Yes, but it can also be a genuine marriage, or at least it can look like one. What happens behind closed doors is your business. But in public, in court, you need to be a real family by every legal definition. Webb pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. Talk to Mrs. Whitlock, see what she says. If she agrees, come back and we'll make arrangements. If she doesn't, he shrugged, then we prepare for a much harder fight. The ride back to the ranch took forever and no time at all. Ethan's mind spun with the implications of what Webb had suggested. Marriage. To a woman he'd known for less than 2 months. A woman who was still grieving her first husband, still finding her footing in a life that had been upended repeatedly. A woman who'd made clear she valued her independence and agency. How could he possibly ask her to give that up, even for the sake of her children's safety? But as the ranch came into view, as he saw smoke rising from the chimney and heard the distant sound of the children playing, he knew he had no choice. If marriage was what it took to protect this fragile family they'd built, then he'd have to find the courage to propose it. He found Mara in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with methodical efficiency. Flour dusted her hands and forearms, and a strand of dark hair had escaped her braid to curl against her cheek. She looked up when he entered, and something in his expression made her hands still. What happened? I talked to the lawyer, Marcus Webb. He's willing to take the case. That's good news. Yes and no. Ethan pulled out a chair and sat heavily. He says our current arrangement won't hold up in court, that Vernon's lawyer will tear it apart, and the judge will likely side with Blood family over a stranger's charitable gesture. Mara's face paled. So we're going to lose? Not necessarily. Webb has a strategy, but it requires... He stopped, unsure how to continue. Requires what? It requires us to marry. The words fell into silence. Mara stood frozen at the table, hands still buried in dough, staring at him with an expression he couldn't read. Marry, she repeated finally. As in, legally bind ourselves to each other. As in, create a legitimate family structure that Vernon can't challenge. As your husband, I'd have the legal right to provide for you and the children. As their stepfather, I'd have authority that supersedes Vernon's grandparental claims. It would eliminate his legal standing entirely. So this would be a marriage of convenience, a legal strategy. Webb called it making our arrangement legally legitimate. Mara pulled her hands from the dough and wiped them on her apron with sharp, jerky movements. Let me make sure I understand. You want me to marry you, not because you have any particular affection for me, but because it would help us win a court case. That's not... It's more complicated than that. Is it? Because it sounds pretty simple to me. We're already living together, already working together, already raising children together. All that's missing is the legal paperwork and the vows that would make me your wife in truth. Her voice had gone flat, emotionless. Forgive me if I'm not overwhelmed with romance. Mara, I'm not trying to... What are you trying to do, Ethan? Because from where I'm standing, you're asking me to give up the one thing I've managed to hold on to through all of this. My independence. My sense of self. You're asking me to become your wife, which means becoming your property in the eyes of the law. Everything I am, everything I own, everything I do would legally belong to you. I would never treat you that way. But the law would. And that's what we're talking about here, isn't it? The law, legal standing, authority, and ownership, and all the pretty words people use to describe one person controlling another. Ethan felt something breaking inside him, some fragile hope he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. Then we don't do it. We find another way. I'll sell the ranch if I have to, hire a dozen lawyers, take Vernon to every court in the territory. We'll find a way that doesn't require you to sacrifice yourself. Can you promise we'll win? No. Can you promise Vernon won't take my children back? No. Mara pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, her flour-dusted hands folded on the table between them. Then we both know there isn't another way. Not really. We can fight, and we might lose. Or we can marry, and we almost certainly win. She looked at him with eyes that held exhaustion and resignation, and something that might have been grief. Those are my choices. Gamble with my children's freedom, or trade my own. Not a trade. I'm not asking for anything from you except legal partnership. Legal partnership that gives you absolute authority over my life, that makes me answerable to you instead of myself, that turns me from a free woman into a wife, which, in case you've forgotten, is just a respectable word for property. I don't see it that way. Maybe you don't. Maybe you're different from other men. Maybe you'd be kind and fair and treat me as an equal partner. But what about when we disagree? What about when you make a decision I don't like? What recourse do I have when you're legally entitled to make all decisions for the household? Ethan was quiet for a long moment, weighing his words. What if we made our own agreement? separate from the legal marriage, terms we both agree to about how decisions get made, how the household runs, how we treat each other. That wouldn't be legally binding. No, but it would be binding between us. A promise is still a promise, even if there's no court enforcing it. Mara studied him, and Ethan saw her considering, calculating, trying to determine if this was genuine or just another manipulation. Finally, she spoke. What kind of terms? That's for us to decide together. Tell me what you need. What would make this tolerable? Tolerable, Mara echoed with bitter humor. What a standard for marriage. But she was thinking, her eyes distant. I'd need to keep control over the children's education and upbringing. I'd need equal say in household decisions. I'd need... She paused, then pushed ahead. I'd need the marriage to remain in name only. Separate bedrooms, separate lives, except where the children and ranch require otherwise. Done. Just like that? You agree without even thinking about it? I've been thinking about little else since I left Webb's office. I'm not asking you to be my wife in the traditional sense. I'm asking you to be my legal partner in protecting these children. Everything else we can negotiate as we go. And if I say yes, if I agree to this arrangement, you swear you won't use the law to control me? Won't pull rank as husband when we disagree? I swear it. On what? Your honor? Your word? Mara shook her head. Words are cheap, Ethan. Vernon made promises too. So did Thomas. Every man who's ever tried to control me promised he was doing it for my own good. Then hold me to a higher standard. If I break my word, if I use the marriage against you, you have my permission to leave. I'll give you money and supplies and do whatever I can to help you start over somewhere else. You can't promise that. Once we're married, you could stop me from leaving. You could take the children. The law would be on your side. The law would, but I wouldn't be. Ethan leaned forward, willing her to believe him. Mara, I know I'm asking for trust I haven't earned. I know you have every reason to be skeptical, but I give you my word, as a man, as whatever friend I hope I'm becoming to you, that I will never use this marriage as a weapon. If you want out for any reason, I'll let you go. Even if it means losing the court case? Losing the children back to Vernon? Even then, your freedom matters more than winning. Mara's eyes were bright with unshed tears. You say that now, but once we're married, once you have the power, then test me. Set conditions. Make me prove it. Ethan's voice was rough with emotion he rarely let show. I'm not asking you to marry me because I want a wife. I'm asking because your children need protection, and this is the only way I know to provide it. But I will not buy their safety with your enslavement. So tell me what you need. What promises would make this bearable? And I'll move heaven and earth to keep them. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of decision. Outside, they could hear the children, Samuel chopping wood, Rosalie calling the younger ones in for washing before supper, Eleanor's wordless humming floating on the cold air. Finally, Mara spoke, her voice steady despite the tears tracking down her cheeks. All right, I'll marry you. But on these conditions, I keep authority over the children's daily care and education. We make all major household decisions together, with neither of us having final say over the other. The marriage remains unconsummated. Separate bedrooms, separate lives beyond what's necessary for appearances. And if you break these terms, I leave with your help and support. Agreed. Is there anything else? Yes. One more thing. Mara wiped her eyes roughly. I want this to be a real partnership, not just a legal convenience. I want to know that if I build my life around this ranch, around you, around the family we're creating, I want to know it won't all disappear the moment the court case is over. I need to know this is permanent or as permanent as anything can be. You have my word. This isn't just about winning Vernon's case. This is about building something that lasts. Then we have an agreement. Mara stood, brushing flour from her apron with hands that trembled slightly. When? Webb said within the week, to avoid it looking like an obvious legal maneuver. This weekend then, Saturday. Give me 3 days to prepare the children and myself for what's coming. Mara, don't. Don't apologize or try to make this romantic. We both know what this is. A necessary arrangement to protect children who deserve better than to be bargaining chips in a legal battle. Let's not pretend it's anything more. She returned to her bread dough, kneading with fierce concentration that clearly signaled the conversation was over. Ethan stood, uncertain what to do or say. Everything about this felt wrong, proposing marriage without affection, asking a woman to bind herself legally to a near stranger, using vows that should mean something as mere legal strategy. But as he looked at Mara, flower-dusted and fierce, working to feed the family that had become hers to protect, he wondered if maybe there were different kinds of marriage, different kinds of commitment that didn't require romance to be real. They were already partners in everything but name. Perhaps making it legal wouldn't change as much as either of them feared. Or perhaps it would change everything, and they'd only discover how much when it was too late to turn back. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Ethan rode to town to file the marriage license and arrange for a simple ceremony at the courthouse. Mara altered the one decent dress she owned, let out at the seams to accommodate the weight she'd gained since arriving at the ranch. The children sensed something momentous was happening, but couldn't quite grasp what it meant. It was Rosalie who finally asked, catching Ethan alone in the barn on Friday evening. "Are you really marrying, Mother?" Ethan set down the harness he'd been mending. "Yes." "Why?" "Because it will help us win the court case. It makes our family legally legitimate." "But do you love her?" The question, asked with a child's directness, left Ethan floundering. "It's complicated. That's what adults say when they don't want to tell the truth." Rosalie crossed her arms, looking far older than her 12 years. "You don't have to love her. I'm not stupid. I know this is about Vernon and the law, but I need to know, will you be kind to her? Will you treat her well?" "I will. I promise you that." "Good. Because she's been hurt enough. Father hurt her with his drinking and his weakness. Vernon hurt her with his cruelty. If you hurt her too, I'll never forgive you." "I understand." "Do you?" Rosalie's eyes were hard. "Because from where I'm standing, you're asking her to give up everything. Her independence, her freedom, her chance at maybe finding someone she actually loves someday, just so we can beat Vernon in court. That's asking a lot." "I know it is." "Then you better be worth it." Rosalie turned to leave, then paused at the barn door. "For what it's worth, I think you are. I think you're a good man who's trying to do right by people who aren't even his. But good intentions don't always mean good outcomes. So prove it, every day. Make this worth what she's sacrificing." After Rosalie left, Ethan sat in the quiet barn, her words echoing in his mind. He'd been so focused on the legal strategy, on protecting the family, that he hadn't fully considered what he was asking Mara to give up. Not just independence, but possibility. The chance to heal from Thomas's death and maybe, someday, find love again with someone she actually chose. Instead, she'd be bound to him, a stranger she'd known for less than 2 months, marrying out of legal necessity rather than affection. It was asking too much. It was asking everything. But there was no other way to protect her children, and they both knew it. Saturday arrived clear and cold, the kind of March morning that promised spring while still delivering winter's bite. Ethan dressed in his one good suit, carefully brushed and pressed. He'd even trimmed his beard and combed his hair, trying to look like someone worthy of standing beside a woman in a courthouse and promising forever. Mara emerged from the bedroom in her altered dress, dark blue fabric that brought out the color of her eyes. She'd braided her hair and coiled it at the nape of her neck, and her hands shook slightly as she pulled on thin gloves. "You look beautiful," Ethan said, and meant it. "Don't lie. I look like what I am, a widow being forced into a second marriage to protect her children." "That's not all you are." "No? Then what am I, Ethan? Because right now I feel like a chess piece being moved around a board by forces I can't control. You're a woman making an impossible choice with courage and grace. You're a mother putting her children's safety above her own happiness. You're—" He paused, searching for the right words. "You're someone I'm honored to stand beside, even if the circumstances aren't what either of us would choose." Mara's eyes softened slightly. "You're trying. I'll give you that." The children were subdued as they climbed into the wagon. Even the younger boys, usually rambunctious, seemed to sense the gravity of the day. Eleanor sat on Rosalie's lap, sucking her thumb, a habit she'd mostly abandoned but returned to in times of stress. The ride to Coldwater was silent, except for the creak of wagon wheels and the steady rhythm of hooves on frozen ground. When they arrived at the courthouse, a small group was already waiting. Marcus Webb, Sheriff Hadley, Miss Patterson from the school, and a handful of townspeople who'd come to witness. Conspicuously absent was anyone from Vernon's circle. The ceremony was brief and businesslike, conducted by Judge Morrison in his traveling capacity as territorial magistrate. He read the required legal language, asked the required questions, and recorded their affirmative responses in his ledger. When he pronounced them married, Ethan and Mara exchanged a look that held too many emotions to name. The kiss that sealed the marriage was chaste and awkward, more obligation than affection. But it was done. Legal, binding. Mara Whitlock was now Mara Calder, and the children were legally his stepchildren, protected by law from Vernon's claims. As they filed out of the courthouse into the bright morning, Marcus Webb pulled Ethan aside. "Congratulations. This changes everything for the hearing." "Does it really? Or have we just given Blackwood new ammunition, a rushed marriage that looks exactly like what it is?" "Let him try to prove it's not genuine. You're living together, raising children together, managing a household together. You've now formalized that with marriage. That's as real as it needs to be in the eyes of the law. And in the eyes of God or common decency?" Webb smiled grimly. "The law doesn't care about those things. It cares about contracts and legal standing. You've secured both." The hearing was set for 2 weeks later in the same courthouse, before the same judge. Ethan and Mara would present their case, Vernon and Blackwood would present theirs, and Judge Morrison would decide the children's fate. Everything they'd built, everything they'd sacrificed, would come down to one man's interpretation of law and justice. But at least now they'd face it as a married couple, with all the legal protection that offered. The question neither of them could answer was what price they'd ultimately pay for that protection, and whether the family they were fighting to preserve would survive the weight of a marriage neither had truly chosen. The 2 weeks between the wedding and the hearing passed with strange velocity, days bleeding into each other in a haze of preparation and nervous anticipation. The marriage changed surprisingly little about their daily routine. Mara still slept in one bedroom with the girls, Ethan still climbed to the barn loft each night, but it changed everything about how the world saw them. Townspeople who'd crossed the street to avoid Mara now nodded respectfully to Mrs. Calder. Shop owners who'd treated the children with suspicion now welcomed the Calder family with careful politeness. Vernon's reaction to the marriage came through his lawyer rather than in person. 3 days after the courthouse ceremony, Marcus Webb arrived at the ranch with a letter from Blackwood demanding the marriage be annulled on grounds of fraud and coercion. Webb had laughed when he read it aloud, then carefully filed it with the rest of the case documents. "Blackwood's grasping at straws," Webb said. "He knows the marriage destroyed his strategy. Now he's trying to undo it before the hearing, but Judge Morrison won't annul a legal marriage without evidence of actual coercion or fraud. Vernon claiming it's suspicious isn't enough." "So we're safe?" Mara asked. "Safer. Not safe. There's still a hearing. Still a chance Morrison could find some technicality to exploit. But our position is significantly stronger than it was 2 weeks ago." The night before the hearing, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay in the hayloft listening to the wind rattle the barn walls and thought about all the ways tomorrow could go wrong. What if Judge Morrison was sympathetic to Vernon's arguments about blood family? What if the rushed marriage actually worked against them, making them look desperate and calculating? What if the children crumbled under Blackwood's questioning? He must have dozed eventually, because he woke to gray dawn light filtering through the barn slats and the sound of the house door opening below. Through a gap in the boards, he could see Mara standing on the porch in her nightgown and shawl, staring out at the mountains as if searching for answers in their distant peaks. Ethan climbed down the ladder and crossed the yard quietly, not wanting to startle her. She didn't turn when he approached, but she spoke. "I've been thinking about what happens if we lose." "We won't lose." "But if we do? If Morrison rules for Vernon? If he takes the children back?" Her voice was steady but hollow. "I need to know you'll help me run, that you won't try to stop me from taking them and disappearing." "I promised I would. That promise stands. Even though we're married now? Even though stopping me would be your legal right?" Ethan moved to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Legal rights don't make something right. If we lose today, if Morrison sides with Vernon, then the law will have failed these children. And I won't compound that failure by using it to trap you here." Mara was quiet for a long moment. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone like Vernon, someone like Thomas. Men who see wives as property and children as burdens or assets depending on their usefulness. She finally turned to look at him, and in the pale dawn light her face looked young and uncertain. But you've never once treated us that way, even when the law gave you the right to, even when it would have been easier to. Easier isn't always right. No, but most people choose easier anyway. She pulled her shawl tighter against the cold. Whatever happens today, I want you to know. I'm grateful. For what you did in the town square. For what you've done every day since. For being the kind of man who chooses harder when it's right. Before Ethan could respond, the house door opened again and Samuel emerged, already dressed for town. We should get ready. Don't want to be late. The courthouse in Coldwater had been transformed for the territorial hearing. Extra benches had been brought in to accommodate the crowd that had gathered. Seemingly half the town had turned out to witness the proceedings. Judge Morrison sat behind a raised desk at the front, his gray beard and severe expression giving him the appearance of an Old Testament prophet rendering judgment. Vernon and Blackwood occupied the left side of the room, Vernon dressed in his finest suit, his face arranged in an expression of wounded dignity. Blackwood looked every inch the successful Helena lawyer, his clothes expensive and well-tailored, his leather case probably worth more than Ethan's best horse. Ethan, Mara, and Webb sat on the right side, with the children lined up on the bench behind them. Samuel sat ramrod straight, his jaw set with determination. Rosalie held Eleanor on her lap, murmuring quiet reassurances. The younger boys tried to sit still but couldn't quite manage it, their nervousness manifesting in fidgeting feet and restless hands. Judge Morrison gavelled the proceedings to order and read the formal complaint. Vernon Whitlock was seeking the return of his daughter-in-law and grandchildren, claiming they had been illegally taken from his care through fraud and exploitation. He was requesting full custody of the children and financial compensation from Ethan Calder for damages. Blackwood stood to present Vernon's case first. He was a skilled orator, his voice carrying easily through the packed courtroom as he painted a picture of Vernon as a grieving grandfather trying to do right by his dead son's family. According to Blackwood's narrative, Vernon had taken in Mara and the children after Thomas's death, sheltered them, fed them, and cared for them despite the financial burden. The public offering in the town square had been a moment of frustration, not a genuine attempt to dispose of the family. Vernon had simply wanted the town to understand the weight of responsibility he was carrying alone. And then Mr. Calder swooped in, Blackwood said, gesturing dramatically toward Ethan, a stranger with no connection to this family, no understanding of their history, no claim of blood or marriage. At that time, took advantage of an old man's momentary weakness. He essentially purchased 7 human beings in a public square, as if we were living in the dark days before the war when such transactions were legal and common. The courtroom murmured. Blackwood let the implication hang in the air before continuing. Since then, Mr. Calder has worked to legitimize his acquisition through a hastily arranged marriage to Mrs. Whitlock, a marriage that occurred mere days before this hearing, after legal proceedings had already begun. The timing alone suggests this was not a union of affection, but a calculated legal maneuver designed to circumvent Mr. Whitlock's rightful claim to his grandchildren. Blackwood called Vernon to testify. The old man took the stand with convincing reluctance, playing the part of a wounded grandfather forced to air private grievances in public. He spoke of Thomas's death, of his own grief, of taking in Mara and the children despite the financial hardship. He admitted the scene in the town square, but claimed it had been misunderstood. He'd been trying to illustrate how overwhelming the burden had become, hoping someone would offer to help share it, not take it away entirely. I never meant to give them up permanently, Vernon said, his voice heavy with staged emotion. They're my blood, my son's children. How could any grandfather truly want to lose his grandchildren? And yet Mr. Calder took them, Blackwood prompted. He did, and I thought perhaps this is temporary. Perhaps this is a good Christian man offering to help until I can get back on my feet, financially and emotionally. But then he refused to let them visit, refused to let me maintain any relationship with my own grandchildren. And when I pursued legal recourse, he rushed into marriage with my daughter-in-law to strengthen his claim. In your opinion, was this marriage genuine or strategic? Webb stood immediately. Objection. Calls for speculation about the interior motivations of others. Sustained, Morrison said. Mr. Whitlock, confine your testimony to facts you personally observed. But the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted. Ethan could feel the courtroom's mood shifting, see people exchanging glances and whispers. Blackwood was good at his job. There was no denying it. When it was Webb's turn to cross-examine, he approached Vernon with casual confidence that belied the sharpness of his questions. Mr. Whitlock, you testified that you took in Mrs. Whitlock and the children after your son's death. How long did they live with you? 4 months, near enough. And during those 4 months, how much did you spend on their care? Vernon shifted uncomfortably. I didn't keep exact tallies. They were family. But you mentioned in your opening statement that the burden was overwhelming. You must have some sense of the cost. Food, shelter, clothing, it adds up. How much food did they receive? 3 meals a day? Adequate meals. That's not what I asked. 3 meals a day? Yes or no? The children ate when there was work to be done. I'm a firm believer in earning your keep. Webb paced slowly, letting that answer settle. So children as young as 4 were required to work for their meals? They had small tasks, nothing excessive. Define excessive, Mr. Whitlock, because we have testimony from multiple witnesses that Samuel, at 14, was working 12-hour days at your sawmill. Is that excessive for a child? The boy needed to learn the value of hard work. He needed to learn, or you needed free labor. Before Blackwood could object, Webb shifted direction. Let's talk about the day in the town square. You called a public gathering to address this family matter, correct? I did. And you stated in front of approximately 50 witnesses that you would give the entire family to anyone willing to take them. Is that accurate? The phrasing may have been unfortunate. Is it accurate? Yes or no? Vernon's jaw tightened. Yes. You offered them to the entire town. Anyone who would take the burden, you said. Take them all or leave them alone. Those were your exact words, were they not? They were spoken in frustration. But they were spoken. And when Mr. Calder accepted your offer, you drew up papers, did you not? Legal documents transferring responsibility? I was under the impression it was temporary. Yet the documents made no mention of temporary arrangements. They stated clearly that in exchange for taking on the family, all debts were considered settled. Permanent settlement of permanent obligations. Webb pulled out a folded paper. I have the document here, signed by you and witnessed by Sheriff Hadley. Would you like me to read the relevant passages? Vernon's face had gone red. The document may say one thing, but your intention doesn't supersede your written and witnessed agreement. You made a public offer, mister. Calder accepted it, you formalized it in writing, and now you're attempting to renege because you regret the consequences. Webb's voice hardened. That's not how contracts work, Mr. Whitlock. That's not how honor works. You made a deal, and now you want the court to let you break it because it didn't turn out the way you expected. Blackwood objected, claiming Webb was arguing rather than questioning. Morrison sustained it, but again, the damage was done. The courtroom had seen Vernon's composure crack, had heard him admit to the very offer he was now trying to deny. Webb called witnesses next. Sheriff Hadley testified about the scene in the town square, confirming that Vernon's offer had been clear and public, that Ethan's acceptance had been immediate and unconditional, that legal documents had been signed that same day. Miss Patterson testified about the children's attendance at school, their progress in studies, their obvious improvement in health and demeanor since leaving Vernon's household. Even Mrs. Henshaw from the boarding house, who'd refused to take the family herself, testified that she'd witnessed Vernon's treatment of Mara and the children during their months in his care, and it had not been kind. He spoke to them like they were servants, Mrs. Henshaw said. No, worse than servants. Servants you pay. These people he treated like they owed him for the privilege of suffering his presence. Then Webb called Mara to testify. She walked to the stand with her head high, wearing the same blue dress she'd worn for the wedding. When she swore to tell the truth, her voice didn't waver. Webb led her through the history, Thomas's death, Vernon's initial offer to help, the gradual deterioration of their situation, the increasing demands and decreasing provisions. Mara spoke clearly and factually, never embellishing, never seeking sympathy. She simply told the truth of what her life had been. Mrs. Calder, Webb said, using her married name deliberately, did you want to marry Ethan Calder? Mara hesitated, and Ethan felt his heart stop. This was the moment Blackwood had been waiting for. If she admitted the marriage was strategic, if she confessed it had been Webb's idea for legal protection, the whole case could collapse. "I wanted safety for my children," Mara said finally. "I wanted them to have enough food, warm beds, education, and a future beyond just survival." Mr. Calder offered all of that. When he proposed marriage, I understood it would strengthen our legal position, but I also understood it would make permanent an arrangement that was already working. So yes, I wanted to marry him. Perhaps not for the usual romantic reasons, but wanting something for practical reasons doesn't make the wanting less real or the marriage less valid. It was a brilliant answer, Ethan realized. Honest enough to be believable, practical enough to explain the timing, but framed in a way that made the marriage sound like a genuine choice rather than a desperate legal maneuver. Blackwood's cross-examination tried to shake her testimony, but Mara was unshakable. She admitted the marriage had been quick, but refused to call it forced. She acknowledged Vernon had provided food and shelter, but made clear it had come at the cost of her children's dignity and well-being. When Blackwood tried to paint her as an ungrateful woman who'd turned her back on family, she responded with quiet steel. Family doesn't starve children. Family doesn't work them until they can't stand. Family doesn't tell a 12-year-old girl she's too stupid to educate or a 4-year-old child that her crying is a burden. Vernon Whitlock provided a roof, but he never provided a home. Ethan Calder gave us both. The courtroom was absolutely silent when she returned to her seat. Ethan wanted to reach for her hand, to offer some comfort or support, but he wasn't sure if such a gesture would help or harm their case. In the end, Mara made the choice for him, her hand finding his and squeezing briefly before letting go. Webb's final witnesses were the children themselves. He called them in order from oldest to youngest, except Eleanor, who was deemed too young to testify. Samuel went first, his testimony fierce and uncompromising. He described life with Vernon in unflinching detail, the long hours at the sawmill, the meager food, the constant criticism and occasional violence. He described the scene in the town square, how Vernon had pushed them onto the wagon like livestock, how the crowd had looked away in shame. "And then Mr. Calder stepped forward," Samuel said. "Nobody else would. The whole town stood there watching us be put up like cattle, and nobody did anything, except him. He didn't know us, didn't owe us anything, but he stepped forward anyway." "Why do you think he did that?" Webb asked. "Objection," Blackwood called. "Speculation." I'll rephrase. "Samuel, in the 2 months since moving to the Calder Ranch, what has life been like?" "Better? I get to go to school. I help with the ranch work, but it's teaching, not punishment. Mr. Calder shows me how to do things right, then trusts me to do them. And Mother," Samuel's voice caught slightly, "Mother smiles now. She didn't smile once in the 4 months we lived with Grandfather, but she smiles at the ranch." Rosalie testified next, her answers shorter but no less powerful. She spoke about school, about learning to read properly for the first time, about having books and paper and a teacher who believed she was worth educating. Jacob and Matthew and Daniel all testified in turn, their childish voices describing simple things: enough food, warm blankets, being allowed to play, not being afraid all the time. When the children's testimony concluded, Judge Morrison called for closing arguments. Blackwood went first, making one final appeal to tradition and blood. He painted Ethan as an interloper, Mara as a confused widow, and Vernon as a wronged grandfather. His rhetoric was polished and persuasive, his appeals to family values and natural order calculated to sway a conservative judge. Then Webb stood for the final time. "Your Honor, this case is not about blood versus law. It's about what family actually means, Mr. Whitlock argues that blood creates indelible bonds, that grandparents have inherent rights to their grandchildren regardless of how those children are treated. But the law doesn't support that position, and neither does basic human decency." Webb walked to stand before the judge, his voice carrying through the silent courtroom. "The law recognizes that family is more than blood. It's care and protection and provision. It's creating an environment where children can thrive, not just survive. Mr. Whitlock provided survival, barely. Ethan and Mara Calder have provided a home, and the children's own testimony makes clear which they prefer. Mr. Whitlock claims the marriage was a legal maneuver. Perhaps it was, Perhaps these two people formalized their partnership specifically to protect the children in their care. But when did that become wrong? When did choosing to create legal family bonds to protect vulnerable children become something to condemn rather than commend? Webb's voice grew stronger, more passionate. The real question before this court is simple. What serves the best interests of 6 children? Returning them to a grandfather who views them as burdens and property? Or allowing them to remain in a household where they're fed, educated, protected, and valued? Where a widow has rebuilt her life and a lonely rancher has found purpose? Where children who were silent with fear have learned to laugh again? Mr. Whitlock says blood matters most, but I say actions matter most. And the actions of Ethan Calder over these past 2 months speak louder than any blood claim Vernon Whitlock can make. Webb returned to his seat, and the courtroom remained silent. Judge Morrison sat at his bench, fingers steepled, expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. This court will take a brief recess to consider the testimony and evidence. We'll reconvene in 1 hour for my ruling. The wait was excruciating. Ethan and Mara took the children outside where they wouldn't have to endure the stares and whispers of the crowd. They stood in the cold March air, watching clouds build over the mountains and trying not to imagine all the ways this could end badly. Whatever happens, Mara said quietly, thank you for trying. We haven't lost yet, but we might. And I need you to know, even if Morrison rules against us, even if we have to run, you gave us 2 months of hope, 2 months of feeling like people instead of problems. That matters. Before Ethan could respond, the courthouse bell rang, calling everyone back inside. The walk back into that courtroom was the longest of Ethan's life. Every step felt like moving toward a precipice, not knowing if solid ground or empty air waited on the other side. Judge Morrison gavelled the proceedings back to order. The courtroom packed to capacity fell into breathless silence. I've considered the testimony and evidence presented, Morrison began. This case requires the court to balance several competing interests: parental rights, grandparental relationships, the welfare of minor children, and the validity of contracts entered into by adults of sound mind. Ethan felt Mara's hand find his under the table, her fingers cold and trembling. Mr. Whitlock argues that blood relationship gives him inherent rights to his grandchildren. While the law recognizes the importance of family relationships, it does not grant absolute authority to grandparents over children who have a living parent. Mrs. Calder, as the children's mother, retains primary parental authority. Her choice to enter a marriage with Mr. Calder, whatever the motivations behind that choice, is legally valid and transfers certain parental authorities to him as stepfather. Morrison's gaze moved to Vernon. Furthermore, the contract signed by Mr. Whitlock transferring responsibility for the family to Mr. Calder in exchange for debt satisfaction is legally binding. Mr. Whitlock's claim that he didn't mean what the document clearly states is not sufficient grounds to void a witnessed and notarized agreement. Vernon's face had gone purple with rage, but Blackwood put a restraining hand on his arm. However, Morrison continued, and Ethan's heart sank at that word, the court must also consider whether the current arrangement truly serves the children's best interests. The testimony suggests significant improvement in the children's welfare since moving to the Calder Ranch. They attend school regularly, they appear healthy and well-fed, they speak without fear and express clear preference for their current situation. Well, the court must also consider the unusual circumstances of the marriage between Mr. Calder and Mrs. Whitlock. While suspiciously timed, the marriage is legal, and by all testimony presented, was entered into freely by both parties. Mrs. Calder's own words, that she wanted the marriage for practical rather than romantic reasons, actually strengthen rather than weaken the validity. She made a clear-eyed choice to formalize a partnership that was already functioning successfully. Morrison leaned forward, his expression grave. The law does not require romance for marriage to be valid. It requires only mutual consent between adults of sound mind. That standard has been met. Similarly, the law does not require blood relation for a man to serve as father to children. It requires only that he provide care, protection, and guidance. Mr. Calder has demonstrated all three. Therefore, this court rules in favor of Ethan and Mara Calder. The marriage is recognized as valid. Mr. Calder's position as stepfather and head of household is upheld. The children shall remain in the Calder's care. Mr. Whitlock's petition for custody is denied, and his claim for financial compensation is dismissed. The courtroom erupted. Vernon shot to his feet, roaring objections that were lost in the chaos. Blackwood tried to call for order, but Morrison's gavel was already pounding. Furthermore, the judge's voice cut through the noise, this court finds that Mr. Whitlock's treatment of the children during their time in his care, as testified to by multiple witnesses, including the children themselves, constitutes neglect. Accordingly, Mr. Whitlock is denied visitation rights, unless and until the Calders choose to grant them. This family has made clear they wish to move forward without his interference, and this court sees no reason to force contact that would cause distress to the children. "This is an outrage!" Vernon shouted. "You're letting a stranger steal my family." "No, Mr. Whitlock. I'm recognizing that you gave away your family in a public square and are now suffering the consequences of that choice. This hearing is concluded." The gavel came down with finality, and suddenly people were surrounding them. Townspeople offering congratulations, Webb shaking Ethan's hand, the children pressing close in relief and joy. Through the chaos, Ethan saw Vernon being escorted out by Sheriff Hadley, the old man's face twisted with fury and humiliation. Blackwood followed, already packing his expensive leather case. His interest in the matter clearly ended now that the verdict was final. Outside the courthouse, in the bright afternoon sun, the Calder family stood together in a small circle. The children were laughing and crying simultaneously, their relief so powerful it had to find expression in conflicting emotions. Mara's face was wet with tears, but she was smiling, really, truly smiling in a way Ethan had never seen. "We won," Samuel said, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "We actually won." "You won because you told the truth," Webb said, having followed them outside. "All of you. You were honest and brave, and that made all the difference." "What happens now?" Rosalie asked. "Can Vernon appeal?" "He can try, but it won't succeed. Morrison's ruling was thorough and well-reasoned. An appeals court would uphold it." Webb looked at Ethan and Mara. "You're free, truly free. This family is legally recognized and protected." After Webb departed and the crowd dispersed, the Calders climbed into their wagon for the ride home. The children chattered excitedly, rehashing the testimony, mimicking Blackwood's dramatic gestures, celebrating their victory. But Ethan and Mara were quiet, both processing what had just happened. They'd won. Against Vernon's money and Blackwood's skill and all the weight of tradition that said blood family came first, they'd won. The children were safe. The family was legitimate. The future was theirs to build however they chose. But Ethan couldn't shake the memory of Mara's testimony, her careful admission that she'd married him for practical rather than romantic reasons. It was true, and she'd been right to say it, but hearing it spoken aloud in a courtroom full of people had driven home the reality of their arrangement. They were married, legally bound, living as husband and wife in the eyes of the law and the community. But in truth, they were still strangers navigating an awkward partnership, held together by circumstances and shared purpose rather than affection. Was that enough? Could it ever be enough? The ranch appeared over the hills as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, bathing everything in golden light. The house looked warm and welcoming, smoke rising from the chimney where Ethan had banked the fire that morning. The barn stood solid and square, the corrals held healthy cattle, and the fields waited for spring planting. It was a good ranch, a good home, and now it was legally, irrevocably theirs. That night, after the children had been fed and settled and sent to bed still buzzing with excitement, Ethan and Mara found themselves alone by the fire. For a long time, neither spoke, both staring into the flames and thinking their own thoughts. Finally, Mara broke the silence. "I meant what I said in court, about the marriage being what I wanted, even if not for romantic reasons. I know. But I wonder sometimes if that's fair to you. You built this ranch for a real family, a wife you loved, children of your own. Instead, you got me and 6 children who aren't yours, bound to you by legal strategy rather than affection." Ethan was quiet, choosing his words with care. "When my wife died, I thought my life was over. Not in a dramatic way, just over. The future I'd imagined disappeared, and I couldn't see any other future worth having. This ranch became a monument to what I'd lost instead of a home for what I still had." He turned to look at Mara directly. "Then you arrived. And suddenly the house was full of noise and life and purpose again. The children ran through rooms that had been silent. You cooked at a stove that had been cold. Every day brought new challenges and frustrations, yes, but also new reasons to get up in the morning. New reasons to care about whether the cattle were healthy and the fences were strong and the roof would hold through another winter. So we gave you purpose, Mara said softly. A reason to keep going. You gave me a family. Not the one I imagined having, but maybe the one I needed. The one I could actually build with what I had left after grief took what it took. Mara's eyes were bright with tears again, but she was smiling. That's not nothing. No, it's not nothing. Ethan hesitated, then pushed forward with words he'd been holding back for weeks. I know our marriage isn't what either of us would have chosen in different circumstances. I know it started as legal strategy and mutual necessity, but I wonder, could it become something more? Not quickly, maybe not for a long time. But eventually, could we build a real partnership, a real marriage? I don't know, Mara admitted. I'm still figuring out who I am outside of being Thomas's wife or Vernon's burden. I'm still learning to make choices because I want to, not because I have to. Marriage, even to someone as decent as you, is complicated when you're still finding yourself. Then take all the time you need. We have our whole lives to figure this out. Do you really mean that? You'd be content to wait, maybe forever, for something that might never develop? Ethan thought about the question seriously. Content might be too strong a word, but willing? Yes. I'm willing to wait, willing to build trust slowly, willing to let whatever happens between us develop naturally instead of forcing it. He smiled slightly. Besides, I'm learning that family doesn't have to look one specific way to be real. What we have right now, this partnership, this household, these children we're raising together, that's already more than I thought I'd have again. If it grows into something deeper, that would be wonderful, but if it stays like this, that's wonderful too. Mara wiped her eyes, half laughing at herself for crying again. You're making it very difficult to maintain my practical, unemotional approach to this arrangement. Good. Someone should shake up your practical approach occasionally. Is that your plan? To slowly wear down my defenses with kindness and patience until I admit I might actually like being married to you? That's a terrible plan. Much too subtle and long-term. I was thinking more along the lines of just continuing to be myself and hoping you eventually get used to having me around. This time, Mara's laugh was genuine and unguarded. You know what? I think I already am. Getting used to you, I mean. The barn loft routine is becoming ridiculous, by the way. You built a perfectly good house with perfectly good bedrooms. You should sleep in one. We agreed to separate bedrooms, not to you freezing in the barn all winter. There's a third room we could add on. Samuel and Matthew are big enough to share with the younger boys. That would free up a bedroom for you. I could do that, build an addition. Would take a few weeks, but it's manageable. Then that's settled. You'll have your own room, I'll have mine, and we'll be a properly married couple who happens to sleep separately because we value our privacy and independence. Mara's smile turned mischievous. Scandalous by some standards, perfectly reasonable by ours. I can live with that. They sat in comfortable silence as the fire burned down to embers. Outside, the night was clear and cold, stars brilliant against the black sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and another answered. The ranch settled into its nighttime rhythms, horses shifting in their stalls, cattle lowing softly, the wind sighing through the pine trees that lined the northern boundary. In the bedrooms, 6 children slept peacefully, safe and warm and secure in ways they hadn't been for most of their young lives. Samuel dreamed of learning to break horses. Rosalie dreamed of books and maybe someday becoming a teacher herself. The younger boys tangled themselves in blankets and each other, the way siblings do. And Eleanor, curled up next to her mother's pillow, finally slept without the nightmares that had plagued her since her father's death. They were a family now, not bound by blood or romance or any of the traditional ties that were supposed to make family legitimate. They were bound instead by choice and necessity, by shared hardship and mutual respect, by the simple decision to keep choosing each other day after day. It wasn't the family Ethan had imagined building when he first broke ground on this ranch. It wasn't the family Mara had expected when she married Thomas all those years ago. But it was theirs, forged from wreckage and loss into something new and unexpectedly strong. The weeks that followed the hearing brought the slow arrival of spring. Snow melted from the high pastures, revealing brown grass that would soon green with new growth. The creek ran high with snowmelt, and the first brave wildflowers pushed through mud near the tree line. Ethan and Samuel began work on the room addition, Samuel learning carpentry with the same fierce focus he brought to every task. The younger boys helped where they could, mostly by keeping the worksite clear and fetching tools. Mara planted a kitchen garden near the house, teaching Rosalie which seeds went where and how deep to plant them. Eleanor followed her mother everywhere, wordless but content, occasionally humming the tunes Mara sang while she worked. The child still didn't speak much, but she'd started drawing pictures with charcoal on scraps of paper, horses and houses and people holding hands in careful, deliberate lines. Vernon Whitlock left Coldwater 3 weeks after the hearing, selling the sawmill to an operation out of Helena and moving south to live with distant relatives. The story went that he couldn't bear the shame of losing to a nobody rancher, couldn't stand the way townspeople looked at him with pity or contempt. Whatever the reason, his departure lifted a weight from the Calder household that they hadn't realized they'd been carrying. With Vernon gone and spring arriving, life found its rhythm. School continued until the term ended in May. Ethan taught Samuel and Jacob to ride properly, fulfilling the promise he'd made to Matthew about learning if he proved responsible. The chickens, finally receiving consistent care and decent feed, began producing eggs in abundance. Mara made more bread than they could eat and started selling loaves in town, earning her own small income that she hoarded with fierce pride. "It's mine," she told Ethan when he found the small cloth purse hidden in her dresser. "Money I earned myself, not given by Vernon or provided by Thomas or even by you. Mine." "I never said it wasn't." "I know, but I need to say it anyway. Need to know I can earn something that's entirely my own." "Then earn it. Use it however you want. I won't ask about it or try to claim authority over it." "You could, legally. As my husband, any money I earn belongs to you." "Legally, yes, but we're not living by what the law says I can do. We're living by what we've agreed is right between us, and I say your earnings are yours." Mara studied him for a long moment, then carefully tucked the purse back into her dresser. "You continue to surprise me," Ethan called her. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" "I'm still deciding." But her smile when she said it suggested she'd already decided, even if she wasn't quite ready to admit it. The room addition was completed in early June, just as the high country grass turned from brown to green and the cattle could be moved to summer pasture. It was a simple room, barely large enough for a bed and dresser, but it had a window facing east to catch the morning sun and solid walls that didn't let in drafts. Ethan moved his few possessions from the barn loft, feeling strange about sleeping in the house after months of exile. That first night in his new room, he lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds. Children breathing in nearby rooms, Mara moving quietly as she prepared for bed, the house settling and creaking around him. It felt right, being here instead of isolated in the barn. It felt like coming home. Summer brought long days of hard work, fences to mend, hay to cut and stack, cattle to move and brand. Samuel worked alongside Ethan with increasing skill and confidence, becoming a genuine partner in the ranch operation rather than just an extra set of hands. Jacob showed aptitude with the horses, gentle and patient in ways that made the animals trust him. Even Daniel and Matthew contributed, taking over daily chores like feeding chickens and collecting eggs with only occasional supervision. In the evenings, after supper was cleared and the children were settling for bed, Ethan and Mara would sometimes sit on the porch together, watching the sun set over the mountains and talking about the day's events. Small things, mostly. Which cow was limping and needed checking, whether the garden beans were ready for picking, how Eleanor had finally spoken a complete sentence that morning instead of just single words. But through these small conversations, they were learning each other, learning how the other thought, what mattered to them, where their values aligned and where they differed. One evening in late July, with summer heat finally reaching the high country and fireflies beginning their dance in the meadow grass, Mara asked the question that had been hovering unspoken between them for months. "Are you happy?" Ethan considered the question seriously. Happy is a complicated word, but content? Yes. Satisfied with how things have turned out? Absolutely. This life we're building, it's good. Better than I expected. Better than I probably deserve. You deserve good things, Ethan. You saved us, gave us a life we never could have built on our own. We saved each other. You gave me purpose again, remember? A reason to care about whether tomorrow comes. Mara was quiet for a moment, watching fireflies pulse in the growing darkness. I think I'm happy too. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever, I'm happy. Not because everything is perfect, but because everything is ours. We built this together, and nobody can take it away from us now. No, Ethan agreed. Nobody can. She turned to look at him then, and in the soft twilight her face was open and unguarded in a way it rarely was during daylight hours. I'm glad we married, not just for the legal protection, though that mattered, but because it made us permanent, made us a real family instead of a temporary arrangement. I needed that permanence, needed to know this wasn't going to disappear when the crisis passed. It's not disappearing, none of it. I know. And knowing that, feeling secure in that, it's changing how I see things, how I see you. How do you see me? Mara smiled, and there was warmth in it that hadn't been there in their early months together. I see a good man who keeps his promises, who works hard and treats children with respect and gives his wife independence when the law says he could demand obedience. I see someone I trust, someone I... She paused, then pushed forward. Someone I'm starting to care for, not just as a partner or co-parent, but as Ethan, the man, not just the arrangement. Ethan felt something shift in his chest, something that had been frozen since last summer beginning to thaw. I care for you too, have for a while now. I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to pressure you or make things awkward. Things are already awkward. We're married people who sleep in separate rooms and tiptoe around our feelings like teenagers. Admitting we care about each other isn't going to make it more awkward. Fair point. So what do we do about it? I don't know. What do you want to do? Mara laughed softly. I want to keep doing exactly what we're doing, building this life day by day, raising these children together, working this ranch and making it prosper. But maybe we stop pretending we're just business partners. Maybe we admit this is becoming a real marriage, even if it didn't start that way. I can live with that. Good, because I can't imagine living any other way now. This ranch, this family, you, it's all become essential. I don't want to go back to what was before. I want to keep moving forward into whatever comes next. They sat together on the porch until full dark, not touching, but close enough that the space between them felt charged with possibility. When they finally went inside to their separate rooms, something had changed. Not everything. They were still navigating complicated feelings and building trust that had been broken by other people's failures. But something fundamental had shifted, like a door opening onto a future neither had quite believed in before. Autumn arrived with its usual splendor, aspens turning gold against the dark pines, and crisp mornings that required coats and gloves. The children returned to school with new slate boards purchased with Mara's bread money. The cattle were brought down from summer pasture, sleek and fat on mountain grass. Ethan and Samuel prepared the ranch for winter, stacking enough firewood to last through the cold months, making repairs to the barn roof, stocking the root cellar with vegetables from Mara's garden. On a cool October morning, with the first frost painting the meadow grass silver, Eleanor spoke her first full sentence in Ethan's presence. She was helping him feed the chickens, carrying a small basket of grain and scattering it with careful precision. Ethan was teaching her to count the hens, making sure all were accounted for. 13, Eleanor said clearly. All 13 are here. Ethan stopped mid-count. That's right. You've got a good eye for numbers. Mother says numbers are important, says I should learn them even though I'm little. Your mother's a smart woman. Eleanor looked up at him with those solemn, dark eyes. Are you my papa now? The question hit Ethan square in the chest. He knelt down to be at her level, thinking carefully about his answer. I'm your stepfather, which means I'm married to your mama and I take care of you and your brothers and sisters. If you want to call me Papa, you can. If you'd rather call me Ethan, that's fine too, whatever feels right to you. Eleanor tilted her head, considering. My real papa went away. He got sick and went away and didn't come back. I know. I'm sorry that happened. Are you going to go away too? No, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying right here on this ranch with you and your mama and all your brothers and sisters, for as long as you'll have me. Forever? That's my plan. Eleanor studied him a moment longer, then nodded as if satisfied. She turned back to the chickens, scattering more grain, and the conversation was apparently over. But as they walked back to the house together, her small hand slipped into his and stayed there. That evening, when Ethan told Mara about the conversation, he saw tears spring to her eyes. "She's been so afraid," Mara said, "of losing people, of things ending. Thomas died so suddenly, and then Vernon tried to get rid of us, and I think she's been waiting for the next terrible thing to happen, waiting for you to leave or die or decide we're too much trouble." "I won't, any of those things." "I know, and now she's starting to know it too." Mara wiped her eyes. "She asked me last night if you were staying forever. I told her yes, but I don't think she believed me. Maybe hearing it from you made it real." "Did she call me Papa?" "Not yet, but she will eventually, when she's ready." Mara smiled through her tears. "The others already do, you know, not to your face, but among themselves. Daniel slipped up yesterday and said, 'Papa's teaching Samuel to break horses,' and then went bright red and tried to take it back. I told him it was fine, that you wouldn't mind." "I don't mind. I'd be honored, actually." "Then I'll tell them they can call you that if they want. We'll make it official." Christmas that year was the first real celebration the family had ever attempted. Mara made special bread and saved eggs for a cake. Ethan rode to town and came back with peppermint sticks and small gifts: a new doll for Eleanor, books for Rosalie, a real pocket knife for Samuel, small toys for the younger boys. They decorated with pine boughs and candles, and on Christmas morning the house rang with laughter and surprised delight. Ethan had one more gift, saved for private exchange with Mara. It was a simple gold band, sized to fit her finger, with her initials engraved inside. "I know we're already married," he said, suddenly nervous in a way he hadn't been since that first awkward proposal. "But that was legal necessity. This is because I want to be married to you, because you're not just my partner or the mother of children I'm raising. You're my wife, and I want you to have something that symbolizes that choice." Mara stared at the ring, her eyes filling with tears. "Ethan, this must have cost—" "It doesn't matter what it costs. Do you like it?" "I love it." She slipped it onto her finger and it fit perfectly. "I don't have anything for you. You gave me a family. That's more than enough." Mara kissed him then, gentle and sweet, the first real kiss they'd shared since that awkward peck in the courthouse 9 months ago. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "I love you," Mara said quietly. "I don't know exactly when it happened. Maybe gradually over months, maybe all at once when I wasn't paying attention. But I love you," Ethan called her. "Not because you saved us or because you're good to the children, but because of who you are, because you're kind and honest, and you keep your promises even when they're hard." "I love you too. Have for a while now. I was just waiting for the right moment to say it." Is Christmas morning, with 6 children about to burst through that door demanding breakfast, the right moment? It's perfect. And it was. The children did burst through the door moments later, chattering about gifts and breakfast and whether it might snow. The day dissolved into chaos and joy, the house full of noise and life exactly as it was meant to be. The years that followed brought all the ordinary struggles and triumphs of family life. There were lean winters and abundant harvests, sick animals and healthy births, arguments and reconciliations, failures and successes. Samuel grew into a strong young man and eventually married a girl from town, building a homestead on the eastern section of the ranch. Rosalie became a teacher, just as she'd dreamed, running the Coldwater School with firm kindness. The younger boys found their own paths: Jacob with horses, Matthew in town as a carpenter, Daniel working the ranch alongside Ethan. Eleanor grew into a quiet young woman with her mother's dark eyes and her stepfather's gentle nature. She never quite lost the solemnity that had marked her childhood, but she learned to smile freely and laugh often. She would eventually marry a doctor and move to Helena, but she came home to the ranch every summer with her own children, teaching them to count chickens and scatter grain the way Ethan had taught her. Mara and Ethan's marriage deepened over time into something neither had expected at the start: genuine partnership, deep affection, and abiding love. The separate bedrooms eventually became an inside joke, maintained more out of habit and independence than actual need. They built their life together day by day, choice by choice, until the boundaries between legal arrangement and real marriage disappeared entirely. The ranch prospered, the family grew and spread but remained connected, drawn back to the homestead that had saved them all. And on warm summer evenings, Ethan and Mara would still sit on that same porch, watching the sun set over the mountains and counting their blessings. "Do you ever regret it?" Mara asked one such evening, years after that first desperate arrangement in the town square. "Taking us in? Changing your whole life for 7 strangers?" Ethan reached for her hand, the gold band on her finger catching the last light. "Not for a single moment. You gave me back my life when I thought it was over. You and the children, you're the best thing that ever happened to me." Even though it started as a legal maneuver? Especially because it started that way. We didn't choose each other because we were in love. We chose each other because we needed what the other could provide. You needed protection. I needed purpose. But from that practical foundation, we built something real, something lasting, something worth fighting for. Always. As twilight deepened into night, they sat together in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the ranch settle into darkness around them. The house behind them glowed with lamplight and echoed with the sounds of family, grandchildren visiting, adult children stopping by for supper, the endless noise and life of a household built on love rather than blood. It hadn't been the life either of them planned. It had been better than planned. It had been real and hard and beautiful and utterly their own. Built not from romance or destiny, but from choice and courage and the stubborn determination to protect what mattered most. In the wide Montana territory where winter was harsh and survival was never guaranteed, one family had forged a home from hardship and made it stand. The rancher's vow, spoken in a town square on a bitter winter morning, had been kept. The family he'd claimed was safe, thriving, and wholly his. And in the end, that was all that mattered.